As I sit down at the table in the corner of the small diner, I check my watch. It's just after 1 in the morning. It had taken me longer to get here than I anticipated, mostly because of a 4-car accident near the off-ramp of the highway. Even with that delay, though, I've somehow managed to arrive 20 minutes ahead of schedule. And yet, Pembroke still got here first. I mentally go back to the many times that I've met with him in person, trying to think of a single time that he hasn't been waiting for me when I arrive. Try as I might, though, I can't come up with a single time. It's simultaneously amusing and annoying. He remains silent as the waitress comes over to the table. There's already a cup of coffee and a slice of pie sitting in front of him. He had been here long enough to order and be served. I'm tempted to simply order dessert as he has, as if that would somehow put us on the same level in some small way, but I quickly dismiss the idea. I'm hungry, and there's no point in staying that way just to satisfy my ego. I order a steak and coffee, and the waitress shuffles off to the kitchen. Pembroke is watching me. I return his gaze, and for a while we just sit there in silence. This is also a common occurrence when meeting him. I don't know this for sure, but I think that he uses silence to both unnerve the other person and to emphasize his words when he does speak. I return his wordless gaze. As much as I don't like dealing with Pembroke, there's no doubt in my mind that he saved my life all those years ago when we first met. He did it for his own reasons, of course. Everything he does is for his own benefit. That doesn't change the fact that he stopped me from going down a much, much darker path than the one that I'm currently on. When I was a teenager, my condition first manifested. Screw it, there's no need for subtlety. That's when I discovered that I'm a lycanthrope, a werewolf, whatever you want to call it. Roughly once a month, as dictated by the lunar cycle, my body goes through a massive change. When this happens, I'm not fully in control of myself. Everything sort of goes red, and while I'm still fully conscious of what I'm doing, it's like I'm running on autopilot. That's when the blood flows all around me. It was worse when I was younger. The killing never seemed to fully satisfy the bloodlust that my condition brings with it. Even when I wasn't the wolf, I would have these urges to kill. I resisted them, but with each cycle they grew stronger and stronger. It got to the point where I began to develop physical symptoms. I like to think that I would have been able to hold out, but if I'm being honest with myself, I know that I wasn't far off from giving in to the need to slaughter. Just before that happened, Pembroke found me. He knew far more about my condition than I did, almost a frightening amount more. He told me that the reason the killing urge was staying with me was because the wolf part of me was dissatisfied. At its core, the wolf is a hunter, and random people are no match for it. It craves a challenge. When that craving isn't met, there are consequences for its host. Consequences for me, in other words. Pembroke didn't just come to me with an explanation. He also presented me with a solution. Every few months, he sends me information about a location somewhere in the country where there is more challenging prey. These places are usually home to some sort of inhuman creature that is terrorizing or otherwise harming the local population. I go to these places so that the wolf can satisfy its needs. The wolf doesn't even want to kill normal people anymore. It's had a taste of something more, and its appetite is insatiable. Normally he emails me the next place on a seemingly endless list, or occasionally passes along the information through a phone call. It's very rare that he opts for a face-to-face meeting. This usually indicates that the place that he's sending me comes with a complicated situation. Without a word, Pembroke reaches into a suit coat and takes out a small piece of folded parchment. Of course it's parchment. No simple paper for this man. He sets it down on the table and slides it towards me. Curious, I pick it up and unfold it. Broken Bend, Montana. That's all that's on the paper. I raise an eyebrow and look at Pembroke. He finally speaks. He tells me that Broken Bend is a small town even by Montana standards. Its location is isolated, and by all accounts the residents prefer it that way. Up until recently there hadn't been anything special about it at all. A year ago, though, There started to be signs that something unnatural was going on in the town. Pembroke says that he can't be more specific because he doesn't have any more details than that despite his efforts to learn more. That in itself is surprising. It isn't normal for him to be so uninformed about a topic. I can tell by the expression on his face that it bothers him, too. When I press him about it, he hesitantly informs me that he had already sent in 3 other associates in an attempt to get more information. They've all disappeared without a trace. No calls, no emails, no nothing. Just poof, gone. The human part of me finds that to be unsettling. The wolf part is excited by it. I refold the piece of paper and slide it back over to Pembroke. I'm going to do as he asks. Of course I am. I always do, not just because of any sense of debt that I feel towards him, but because he has never failed to come through with something that keeps the wolf satisfied and me from becoming a serial killer. Besides, although the apprehension isn't fading, I have to admit that the mysterious nature of this particular job has piqued my curiosity. No one really knows what lycanthropy is. Oh, sure, the symptoms of it are well known. Becoming a wolf-human hybrid during the full moon phase of the lunar cycle, intense rage, propensity to ridiculously high amounts of violence, all of that. What is yet to be successfully explained is what's actually going on in the person's body during all of this. There are some people that say it's a bonding of a human and wolf spirit, while others take the less romantic yet more scientific route of attributing it to some sort of virus or genetic mutation. There's no definitive answer. Whatever it is, one thing that I know for a fact is true is that the traits are shared between the human and the wolf. The wolf retains my ability to read and problem solve, for example. It works both ways, though. Ever since my condition became active, I've noticed that I've been more curious and eager to dive into mysteries in an attempt to unravel them. The old tales about cats and their curiosity were written by people that had never had a wolf living inside of them. Now that I've agreed to take on Pembroke's new business, there's a bit of old business that has to be addressed. I finish my food while he ignores his coffee and pie, and after paying the waitress, I lead him outside to my camper. Not for the first time, I notice his nose wrinkle in disapproval at the sight of the old brown and black vehicle. I have to admit that it really isn't much to look at. It's perfect for my needs, though, and I'm usually able to find cheap parts to repair it on the rare occasions that it breaks down. Before opening the side door, I take a quick glance around the parking lot to make sure that we're alone. It's not likely that anyone else is lurking around this early in the morning, but it never hurts to be careful. Satisfied, I unlock the door and swing it open. Sitting on the floor is a white cooler. I slide it out and set it down on the concrete before motioning for Pembroke to open it. He kneels down and flips the latch before sliding the top back. Inside the cooler, packed in plastic and ice, is a woman's jaw. The skin is still on it, and blood is frozen in place along its length. Attached to the jaw is a pink fleshy mass, the remainder of the neck and windpipe. Pembroke examines them closely like an archaeologist inspecting calcified bones. After a long moment, he nods and closes the cooler. As he walks away towards his extremely expensive black car with the cooler in hand, I find that I'm grateful to be rid of the thing. Remains inside of it are those of a banshee. This is the second one that I've hunted, and the process was just as unpleasant as it was the first time. The wolf enjoys a challenge, yes, and no one can argue that a banshee isn't a difficult hunt. They have superhuman strength and speed, and the flying part certainly doesn't make things easier. It's that damn scream that I hate, though. As a predator, the wolf's ears are extremely sensitive. You can only imagine what a supersonic scream sounds like through them. It's unpleasant, to say the least. I run a hand through my hair. It's all in the past. Now it's time to focus on the future, and that future lies in Broken Bend, Montana. I get in the camper and turn the engine over. I haven't been in Montana in a long time. As I pull out of the parking lot, I try to remember what I was hunting there during my last visit. Was that the Draugr? No, I'm pretty sure that was South Dakota, not Montana. It might have been the Nalusa Falea. Maybe. That doesn't seem right either. I sigh. Everything sort of blends together. Taking out my cell phone, I put Broken Bend into the map app. According to it, it's about a 12-hour drive there from where I'm currently at in Minnesota, assuming no stops or delays. I quickly do the math in my head. That gives me roughly 43 hours until the wolf comes out to play. During that time, I'll need to figure out exactly what's going on, find the source of whatever that is, and make sure that I have the wolf pointed in the right direction to, shall we say, solve the problem when the transformation begins. Not a lot of time, and I'm not exactly a detective. I'll just have to make it work somehow. It's cold outside, and I suspect that it will get colder when I reach Montana, but I put down the window anyway to let the air wash over me. At the same time, I crank the truck's heater as high as it goes. The wind will help keep me awake during the drive, while the heater will make sure that the wind won't freeze me to death while doing so. I drive all night. My first stop is in North Dakota just as the sun is rising over the horizon behind me, and that's only long enough to go to the bathroom and pick up some fast food. Fatigue is beginning to set in, and I've had enough long nights at this point to mostly ignore it. I can rest when I get to my destination. My second stop occurs as I cross into Montana. There's a travel center less than a mile past the border, and I pull the truck off the highway and park it in one of the many open parking spaces. I get out and take a few minutes to stretch out some kinks before going inside. I immediately make a beeline towards a tall rack of maps. I found over the years that while online maps and GPS are great tools to help me get where I'm going, they're often inaccurate when it comes to more remote locations. Sometimes locations of roads are mismarked or points have been updated after changes have been made. That's where an actual old-fashioned physical map really comes into its own. It's much easier to find different ways into a town when you don't have an electronic voice telling you to turn left into a cliff. I go over to one of the round white tables and open the map. It takes me a moment to locate the town that I'm looking for. I'm immediately glad that I made this stop. A number of the roads that the app had said were coming up aren't actually where they said they are. Score one for experience over technology, I guess. I return to my truck and pull back out onto the highway. I'm on the final stretch of the trip now, but judging by the terrain on the map, it promises to be the most difficult section. I'm going to be traveling through the mountains to reach my destination. Camper tends to struggle a bit on heavy inclines. My prediction turns out to be true. While I'm on the highway, it's an easy enough drive, but when I'm forced to turn off onto back roads that continue towards Broken Bend, the truck really begins to have issues. The steep hills force every ounce of power from its engine. Many of the roads can barely be called roads at all, and the dirt and rocks cause the truck to bounce all over the place. I breathe a heavy sigh of relief when a large green sign proclaiming "Welcome to Broken Bend" appears on the side of the road. Passing the sign, I almost immediately plunge into a thick forest. It's so dark under the trees that I have to turn on the truck's lights even though it's the middle of the afternoon. After a few minutes, I start to feel a bit nervous. There's no traffic in either direction, and being basically cocooned by the trees gives me the odd sense that I'm alone in the world. I shake the feeling off and continue on. The road turns slightly to the right. As I come around the corner, I find a huge tree trunk splitting the road in two about a dozen or so yards ahead of me. It's by far the largest tree that I've seen since entering Montana, and it looks like it was split right down the middle by a bolt of lightning at some point in its history. I can't help but smile slightly. With the tree splitting the path after the curve, it's a literal broken bend in the road. The founders of the town hadn't been very imaginative, apparently. The forest ends a couple of miles further down the road. I squint against the bright light as I emerge from under the trees. The road is at the top of a tall hill, and it's from this vantage point that I get my first good look at Broken Bend. The town rests at the base of a group of mountains. It isn't very large, but it looks incredibly pleasant and picturesque. To the left of the small downtown area is a large lake that sparkles as the sunlight dances on its surface. With the exception of the road leading towards the mountains, the entire place is surrounded by woods every bit as thick as the one I just passed through. I feel something stir deep within me. The wolf is uneasy. It doesn't feel like it's sensing any immediate danger, but more like there's something off about the town and the area around it that has caught its attention. It doesn't like what it's seeing. There's another feeling mixed in with that unease. I smile slightly as I guide the camper towards the buildings. It's eagerness. Whatever the wolf is sensing, it's excited at the prospect of encountering it. I'll just need to figure out what it is before the wolf comes out to play tomorrow evening. I don't doubt the wolf's instincts, but it's hard to imagine that there's something sinister going on at Broken Bend as I arrive downtown. Its buildings are older but well maintained, and the same can be said for the roads themselves. People walking to and from the local businesses seem normal at a first glance. Everything that I'm seeing looks a lot more Norman Rockwell than Stephen King. Spotting a bar, I pull the camper into a small gravel parking lot and get out. There's no point in delaying the start of my investigation, and I found that bars are always a good place to get information from the locals. Besides, I'm hungry. That's one of the less obvious downsides of my condition. There's something about it that makes me burn through calories at a faster rate than other people, even when I've just been driving all day. As a result, I eat more often and in higher quantities than someone my size typically would. No matter how much I consume, though, I stay thin, maybe too thin. My cell phone chimes as I'm walking around the side of the building towards the bar's front door. I take it out of my pocket and glance at the text message. It's from Pembroke. Deposit made. Send any updates. I nod to myself. To make sure that I'm as flexible as possible when it comes to the jobs he gives me, Pembroke pays me a monthly stipend. He basically has me on retainer. I also submit any expenses to him for reimbursement. In a strange way, Pembroke has managed to turn monster hunting and killing into a proper business. He's never told me where he gets the money from, and I've never asked. Judging by the way that he dresses and the car that he drives, along with the vibe his general demeanor gives off, it's obvious that he's wealthy. I'm not sure that I want to know how he came into that wealth, though. The bar is nicer than most of the ones I've been in. The walls are reclaimed wood that has been stained a pleasant brown, and the long bar's shiny surface matches the coloring. The lighting is dimmed, but not to the point of making things seem dark. There are half a dozen patrons inside. I suspect that number will grow when the surrounding businesses close for the day. There are a few tables in the center of the room and booths lining one of the walls, but I head directly for the bar. I'm here for information, and a small town's bartender is often the best source for that. They overhear a lot of interesting details from customers that have had a little too much to drink. The bartender is a pleasant man of about 60. He greets me with a smile and asks what I'd like to drink. I tell him that whatever's on tap is fine and asks to see a menu. He hands me one from under the counter and goes to get my beer. I tend not to drink much. When a normal person gets drunk, they get loud and sometimes a bit abrasive. When I get drunk, some of the wolf's more undesirable traits come to the surface and things get dangerous for the people around me. It's better for everyone that I stay sober. It would have seemed strange not to order alcohol in a bar, however, so I'll just have to be sure to keep myself to a 2-drink maximum. I end up ordering the largest burger on the menu as well as a side of chicken wings. Not only do I need to eat more than most people, I also require more protein. The result is that my food consumption makes the caveman diet look vegan. As I eat, I strike up a conversation with the bartender. I intentionally keep it light. Going right for the hard questions is a good way to raise suspicions and clamp mouths shut. Things quickly take an unexpected turn. After the first few minutes, the bartender smoothly turns the conversation to focus on me. Where I'm from, why I'm in town, that sort of thing. I don't let on that I've noticed, but out of the corner of my eye I see 2 of the patrons that have been seated in the booth sit down at the far end of the bar. Either life in Broken Bend is so dull that a single random stranger is seen as a major change of pace, or something more threatening is starting to happen. I try to diffuse things before they start. Typically, I'm not a great liar, but on the way to town I had carefully crafted a cover story involving me being a writer that is traveling around doing research for a book that takes place in a small Montana town. I tell the bartender that I'm from New York, so I feel that I need to actually experience what I'm writing about to make it come off as authentic. When he asks why I chose Broken Bend, I give a small shrug and tell him that I simply picked a random spot off the map. I make it a point to slip in an almost offhanded comment that my editor has approved of my plan. The amount of attention that I'm receiving after less than half an hour in the bar is unsettling, and I want to make my son and admirers know that someone outside of Broken Bend knows where I am. It's a small precaution, and it's completely dependent on how much these people are believing my story. It's still better than nothing. Another person has come to the bar. It's time to end this, get some distance, and come up with a different way to proceed. I don't like where this situation is heading. I pay for my food, thank the bartender, and go back outside. To my surprise, no one tries to stop me. I can feel the eyes of the bar patrons on me, though, and I hurry towards the camper and away from them. When I reach the parking lot, I find a man dressed in a sheriff's uniform waiting for me. He's leaning up against the camper and staring at me silently. The hand that rests on his gun communicates all that needs to be said. He identifies himself as Sheriff Paul Garrett. He tells me that he's responding to a call his office received about a drunk stranger making a scene inside the bar. Nothing had happened while I was in there, of course. I know that. It's quite clear that the sheriff knows that as well. He's using this false claim as an excuse. He asks to see my identification, and I slowly take my wallet out of my pocket so that I can produce my driver's license. I hand it over to him and wait as he examines it closely. Best case scenario, he gives me a few veiled threats and points me out of town. Glance down at his gun again. The worst case scenario is something that I really don't want to think about. The wolf stirs inside of me. I'm not without ways in defending myself. I might not have the superhuman abilities of the wolf more than once a month, but I know how to fight, and I'm willing to go to the extremes that most people aren't. I don't like to kill. It doesn't mean that I'm a stranger to it, and that I won't do it again if necessary. Hopefully it won't come to that, though. Killing a cop, even one in such a remote town, will raise all kinds of alarms and create a wide variety of new problems for me. Things have accelerated way too quickly. I've been in Broken Bend for less than an hour, and I'm already in a position where I'm actually considering killing the sheriff. Garrett asked me how much I had to drink while I was in the bar. I respond truthfully that I had a single beer. He regards me for a long moment as he slowly rotates my license in his fingers. I remain silent, fully aware that he's looking for something to use against me. Eventually he tells me that the person who had called in the complaint said that it was at least 6 drinks, that based on what he was seeing, he believed the caller. The hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. It's both amused and mocking. It confirms to me that there was only one way this conversation was ever going to go. A loud creaking noise from behind me breaks the silence. I glance over my shoulder and see the patrons from the bar coming out of the building's back door. All of them have that same look of smug viciousness that's plastered on Garrett's face. As they start to surround me, I take a step to my right, but the sheriff taps his gun and I have to stop moving. The bar patrons come at me as a group while the sheriff watches. Screw the gun. I'm not letting anyone take me without a fight. I lash out at the first man that reaches me, use my forearm to smash him in the face. I feel bone and cartilage crunch as his nose shatters. He stumbles backwards, blood running down over his hands as he moans in pain. Deep inside of me, the wolf growls its approval. My sudden violence surprises my attackers, and they hesitate. It's all that I need to turn my attention to the next closest and grab his arm. Before he can react, I bring my foot down hard on the inside of his leg. There's an audible snap as he crumbles to the ground, screaming and grabbing at his now broken fibula. I bare my teeth at the rest of the men and ask who's next. It's all bravado. The hope is that my confident-sounding challenge encourages the 3 remaining bar patrons to come at me one at a time instead of as a group. This works for one of them. He charges towards me as he attempts to tackle me to the ground. I take a step back and use his own momentum to drive him downward. His face connects with the gravel parking lot where he lays motionless. He's been knocked unconscious. At least, I think he's just unconscious. It was a pretty hard hit. The other two are smart enough to come at me at the same time. I do my best to keep them off of me, but there's only so much that I can do to protect myself. I take a few hard shots to my side. Doubling over in pain, I try to suck the air back in my lungs as I force them off of me and back up. Unless I come up with something fast, this isn't going to end well for me. There's a sharp stabbing sensation in the side of my neck. I twist away from it and turn towards the direction it came from. Standing a few feet away from me, a hypodermic needle in his hand. It's Garrett. The plunger is pushed in. The fucker injected me with something. My limbs immediately start to feel heavy. I stumble on the gravel and fall down to one knee. The two guys from the bar jump on me and flatten me to the ground. I don't put up much of a fight. Whatever is pumping through my veins is making my body unresponsive and is on the verge of shutting me down entirely. My eyelids droop as everything starts to go black. I give one last token attempt at moving before I pass out completely. Consciousness doesn't come back to me easily. My mind swims in and out of the dark place it finds itself in, sometimes towards the speck of light that is the outside world and sometimes away from it. I don't have any control over it. I just float around in this near-perfect void, a passenger on its black currents. I feel sharp teeth on the back of my neck. Suddenly I'm headed rapidly for the light. It grows larger and brighter with each passing moment as the wolf drags me back towards the living world. I silently thank it as a rushing sound fills my ears and my eyes snap open. I immediately shut them again to shield them from the blinding orange glow in front of me. Squinting, I allow my eyes time to adjust to the light before opening them all the way. Less than 10 feet in front of me is a large fire. Its flames shoot up above my head, and the heat from it blasts against my body. The smell of smoke fills my nostrils. Tearing my eyes away from it, I look around at my surroundings. Given the size of the fire, I'm surprised to find that I'm indoors. The room is built from a combination of wooden boards and stonework. There are markings on many of the boards, but it's difficult to make them out. It takes me a few moments to realize that I'm in a standing position. I shake my head in an attempt to clear it as I look up. My hands are tied over my head by a rope hanging down from a wood beam. It's just barely long enough for my feet to rest flat against the floor. I pull down on the rope, but all that accomplishes is making the knot pull slightly tighter against my skin. I don't know where I am, and I don't know why I've been brought here. There's no doubt that it's in my best interest to get the hell out of here, though. The indoor bonfire and the markings that I can't decipher imply some sort of ritual, and if I ride that train of thought to the next stop, that combined with my encounter with the bar patrons and sheriff screams cult. I lift my feet off the floor so that my full weight is pulling down on the rope. I hold myself like that for nearly a minute before giving up in frustration. Neither the rope nor the beam it's attached to are budging. Forcing myself to stay calm, I look up towards the ceiling and attempt to see exactly what's connecting the rope and beam. It's hard to tell for certain, but it looks like it's a thick hook of some kind. A plan starts to form. If I can swing myself far enough, maybe I can get the loop tied into the rope to slip up and off the hook. I lower my head as I mentally trace the angle that I'll need to swing at to make that a possibility. I narrow my eyes as I realize the direction I'll need to go in is dangerously close to the fire. If I'm off by even a couple of inches, I'm going to end up turning myself into kindling. I don't see any other possible way out of this, though, so it's a risk that I'm going to have to take. Gritting my teeth, I once again lift my feet off the ground so that I'm hanging by my hands. Using the tips of my feet, I begin to swing my body back and forth. Each time that I come forward, I lean into the motion to make myself travel further. It takes a bit of trial and error, but eventually I get the rhythm down and I'm rocking back and forth on the rope like a coked-out Tarzan. I'm just starting to believe that I can't move the rope enough to make my plan work when suddenly I'm falling through the air towards the far side of the room. I pass dangerously close to the fire before narrowly missing it and crashing into a wall. The impact stuns me for a moment, and I have to wait for the stars of my vision to fade before getting back to my feet. The rope is still tied around my hands. I'm not hanging from the ceiling anymore, though, and that's the important part. There's a closed door near me. Before I open it, I take a moment to get a better look at the markings on the wall. Reach out with one finger and touch the closest one. It's been drawn with blood. There's nothing subtle about the shapes. They're crude drawings depicting a group of people worshipping a tall figure with a skull-like face. The figure is surrounded by flames, and those same flames adorn the heads of the worshippers like fiery crowns. On the wall closest to where I'd been hanging, there's a bloody mural of a man being sacrificed. He's suspended over a large bonfire, and the same skull-faced figure from the first set of drawings is overseeing the procedure with a wide grin. It's not hard to guess that I'm intended to be the one roasting in the flames. I wonder if that's what happened to the people that Pembroke sent to Broken Bend before me. If the wolf hadn't intervened and forced whatever I'd been injected with out of my system. That doesn't matter right now. What matters is getting the fuck out of here before my captors come back. I go over the door and press my ear up against it. I don't hear anything on the other side, but it's hard to hear much of anything over the roar of the fire. Turning the handle, I open it slowly before going out into the hallway. The passage is small and cramped. Without any light sources, it's also incredibly dark. I go back into the room I had been trapped in and carefully extract a single burning branch from the fire. It's a bit difficult with my hands still tied together. I have to be careful to make sure the length of rope doesn't get caught in the flames. With my makeshift torch in hand, I return to the hallway and work my way down it. I move cautiously, and it takes me a few minutes to reach the end of the corridor. It terminates in another door. Setting the torch down on the stone floor, I open it, wincing at the screech the old hinges make as they swing. There are lit lanterns inside this room, so I don't need to retrieve the burning branch. This room is smaller than the one I had woken up in. In the center is a stone altar, the gray rock stained dark with blood. It isn't large enough for a human body to fit on, and I wonder what exactly it's used for. Whatever its purpose is, it's clear from the fresh ichor that it's been used recently. Hanging from the left wall are a series of sharp instruments. I don't recognize a number of them, namely the ones that look like twisted fire pokers with clamps. My eyes fall on a long black serrated knife. Hurrying over to it, I remove it from its hook and carefully turn it in my hand so that I can use it to cut through my bonds. It's difficult work, and I have to move slowly to avoid cutting myself because of the awkward angle I have to hold it at, but eventually I manage to slice through enough of the rope to free my hands. I've just finished when the door opposite of the one I came through opens. A man dressed in a black robe comes into the room. He obviously wasn't expecting to see me here, as he turns towards me in surprise and takes an involuntary step backwards. Before he can say or do anything, I'm rushing forward and plunging the serrated knife into the side of his neck. I clamp my free hand down over his mouth and hold him up against the wall until his feeble struggling ceases and his eyes close. I pull the knife free and allow his lifeless body to slide down to the ground. I pull back the hoodie he's wearing and get a better look at his face. I don't recognize the man. He's definitely not one of the people that attacked me back at the bar. There's no point in staying here. I go out the door he entered it through and climb the stairs on the other side. These lead to yet another door. There's a dim light coming from underneath this one, and I can feel fresh air blowing through the cracks. It has to lead outside. I open the door a few inches and peer out. I'm at what looks like some kind of camp. About a dozen buildings stand next to each other in a large circle, with a huge bonfire burning in the center. Thick woods surround the clearing. People in the same black robes as the man I just killed are walking from building to building, some in groups and some individually. 4 of them are busy erecting tall poles around the fire and securing them so that they stand upright. Everyone seems to be in a hurry to make preparations for something, as the last of the daylight is fading from the sky. I close the door and lean up against it as I mentally run through my options. The beginnings of a plan are starting to form. I dress myself in the dead man's robe. It's dark enough outside that no one will be able to see my face with the hood pulled up. I can blend in just long enough to escape this camp, then I can... My thoughts are interrupted as I feel my heart skip. It's quickly followed by the feeling of needles prickling the skin of my arms and legs. I sit down the stairs and take a deep breath. I I know what these sensations are, and I know what they lead to. It doesn't make any sense, though. The change isn't supposed to happen until tomorrow. Wait, how long was I out after being drugged? I had been out for over 24 hours? I think back to how the wolf had pulled me back to consciousness. The closer we get to the time of transformation, the more influence the wolf was able to have over me. How much time passing would explain how I was able to overpower the drugs. I get back to my feet and return to the room at the bottom of the stairs. I smile to myself as I do so. These people made a mistake by not immediately killing me. Few minutes, they're going to find out just how big of a mistake it was. We need to work together, I say to the wolf as I close myself in the altar room. We still need to figure out what's going on in this town. If we're still in Broken Bend, anyway. I hear a rumbling growl, not in my ears, but instead inside of my mind. Oh yes, I agree with the wolf, feeling my smile turning into something much more vicious. We most definitely still get to kill every last one of them. I can feel the beast's bloodlust growing inside of me as I get down onto my knees. We're in agreement. A bit of detective work with our carnage to fulfill both our intellectual and physical needs. With a shock that races up and down my spine, the change begins. To say the transformation is painful is an understatement. My entire body has to reconfigure itself to allow for the wolf to come out. In a very real sense, it has to break everything that is me so that something new can be born. It starts with the bones in my face. My teeth clack together as my cheekbones snap down the middle. Tears fill my eyes as my orbital bones follow. The change is happening faster than usual. The wolf is eager to be free. Thinking quickly, I pull my belt off and put the strap in my mouth. I barely manage to do so before my shoulders pop out of their sockets. I bite down into the leather and muffle my screams of pain. I feel the blood begin to run out of the corners of my mouth. One by one, the vertebrae in my back pop as my spine twists into a new shape. This process not only floods me with fresh agony, but also causes me to lose control of areas of my body momentarily as the bone presses into the cord. In some ways, this temporary paralysis is the worst part of the entire change, and I feel relief when the vertebrae lock into place in their new configuration. The final stage of this part of the process is next, and I brace myself for it as best as I can. With a flash of white-hot pain, my hips shatter. I bite down to the belt so hard that my gums start to bleed. A part of me is aware that the bones of my legs are breaking into pieces, but I'm so preoccupied with the burning in my midsection that I barely notice. The rest of my skeleton continues to break down in preparation for the wolf's emergence. This is by far the worst part. During the second part of the change, I have two sets of nerves connected to me, the ones running through my current body, the ones attached to what is replacing it. I feel pain from each set simultaneously, meaning that I experience a level of suffering that no other person can ever reach. All of them cry out as they're stretched and mangled and torn. I lose all connection with the world around me as I'm swallowed into a void of torture. There's no thought or reason, nothing but the deep and everlasting torment. I gasp as the world comes flooding back to me and the pain flows out of me. My skin is splitting open as the wolf emerges from my human husk. It's like all the pressure is being released from me. There are a few tiny discomforts as the change is completed, but within moments I feel the last of my bones click into place, and suddenly I feel incredible. I get to my feet. Everything feels so different now. Powerful. It's like I'm standing on my legs for the very first time. The lanterns in the room cast my shadow onto the wall, and for a moment I stare at the large profile. I can see the pointed ears and long jaws of the wolf, as well as the powerful body and clawed hands. There had been a time, back before I had been put on the path of a true hunter, that my werewolf form had been thin and gaunt. Now, though, my body is lean and strong, the body of a true predator. I shake the blood off my fur as I pull a strip of ruined flesh off the bottom of my muzzle. My senses are heightened far beyond what they normally are. I can hear the footsteps from people walking around outside, and the crackling of the flames from the bonfire. Smell the scents of fresh dirt and dried blood all around me. I can see every crack and gap in the wood stones that make up the room I'm standing in. It's like I'm experiencing the world for the first time. Normally I'm not as aware as I am right now. Usually the wolf is in the driver's seat when I take on this form. At least for the moment though, the wolf is honoring our agreement. It understands the need for us to work together to learn what has happened in Broken Bend so that we can report back to Pembroke. Time for that investigation will come shortly. First things first, though. It's time to teach these assholes a very important and very permanent lesson. The wolf snarls in approval. Running on all fours, I charge up the stairs and burst through the wooden door at the top, sending shards of wood and metal flying in every direction. The robed figures around the fire stop what they're doing and stare at me in complete surprise. I glare at them with my black eyes before throwing back my head and howling a bloodthirsty challenge. I'm moving towards the nearest cultist before he can grasp what's happening. My claws dig into his chest, and with little effort I tear him in half. Blood and gore spray in every direction. I drop the remains of the body as I feel the exhilaration of the kill flowing through me. I'm already moving on to the next one. This one manages to get his hands up, but hands are just flesh over bone, and the wolf can't be stopped by such easily severed things. Cultist screams until his throat is torn out and his head separated from his shoulders. The other robed figures are getting over the shock of my appearance now, and they are quickly advancing towards me with all manner of weapons. They're carrying everything from shovels to knives similar to the one that I'd used to cut through my bindings. Surprisingly, none of them seem to have guns. It wouldn't matter if they did, of course. Nothing short of a high-powered shotgun blast at point-blank range can do any real damage to me, and even then it's nothing permanent. There's something about werewolf skin that absorbs and distributes impact in such a way as to make bullets trivial. Stabbing weapons such as knives are a bit more effective, but those have a different sort of disadvantage for the attacker. Those take hands to hold them and arms to lift them, and I'm very good at making limbs go away. I take a mental step back and allow the wolf to join me. Not for the first time. We notice how fluid our movements are. There's no wasted motion. We move from cultist to cultist like water flowing over rocks, claws and fangs singing as they tear and slice and rip. The wolf is an artist in the medium of carnage. When the last of the row people fall, we look around and spot a man dressed in a uniform slowly walking towards us. The wolf grins broadly, exposing its rows of teeth. It's Sheriff Garrett, the man that had drugged us. Now is our chance to thank him properly. Garrett doesn't seem to be afraid of the wolf. He walks calmly towards us, removing his coat as he does so. He lets it drop to the ground and removes his tie as well before rolling up his shirt sleeves. When he is less than a dozen feet away from us, he stops and cracks his neck. Furious at the sign of disrespect, the wolf lunges forward. With superhuman speed, Garrett steps out of the way and slams his fist into our side. The blow is hard enough to knock us to the ground, and we scramble to our feet less than a second before its foot stomps down in the spot we just occupied. The wolf bares its teeth again, but doesn't immediately attack. Something is wrong with this man. That's when the scent reaches our nose. It isn't the smell of a typical human man. There's something else mixed with it. We don't recognize it, but it makes the hairs on our backs stand up. Seeing our hesitation, Garrett smiles at us and gestures for us to come at him again. The wolf charges forward. We're a cunning predator, and this time instead of blindly attacking, we wait for Garrett to move. We pivot slightly and launch ourselves towards the spot that he'll be standing on once his dodge is finished. He manages to adjust his course just in time to avoid being tackled. It isn't without a price, however. Our claws lash out, and they strip a chunk of flesh off the side of his face. He pushes us away before we can do any further damage. As he does so, the tip of our claws catches on the collar of his shirt and tears it. Removing the cloth reveals that he's wearing a necklace. It's adorned with teeth of all shapes and sizes. Some of them are human, and others are from various animals, but most of them are clearly not from anything natural. Garrett has been hunting paranormal creatures as well. He's the aggressor now, quickly closing the distance between us and striking us just under the ribs with the point of his elbow. Almost before the pain registers, he's bringing his knee up and smashing it into our jaw. Our head goes back from the impact, and he uses the opening to slam us in the throat with the palm of his hand. We choke at the sudden loss of air while bright lights flash before our eyes. We don't see him get behind us, but we certainly feel his boot connecting hard with our back before we hit the ground. His strength and speed are incredible. More than that, he knows exactly how to use these advantages. Whatever's been done to him has resulted in someone extremely dangerous, even to a creature like us. Garrett steps back into view as we are pushing ourselves up. He kicks us hard on the side of the head to put us back down. We can smell our own blood coming out of our nose and mouth. As we watch, he pulls a long hunting knife out of a pouch on his belt. The expression on his face is eager. He thinks that we're done, and he sees us as the next trophy to adorn his necklace. He's wrong. If he wants inhuman speed and strength, we'll show him what that really means. As he starts to bend over with the knife, we lunge forward and clamp our jaws around his ankle. He cries out as our teeth easily penetrate through the cloth of his pants and sink into the skin and muscle. We pull him off of his feet while simultaneously getting back to ours, never letting go of the leg in the process. With a hard twist, we tear off the lower half and fling it to one side. Garrett points the knife up at us as his face goes pale. We bring our foot down on his wrist and pin his arm to the ground. Bring our face down close to his. We reach out with our right hand and use the steel-like claws to easily slice the arm free from his shoulder. He opens his mouth to scream, but no sound comes out. The veins in his neck bulge, and his eyes roll wildly in their sockets. He no longer interests the wolf. He is beaten, and there is no point in torturing him. The joy is in the hunt and the kill. We grip his head in both hands and crush it inward until he stops moving. More cultists have arrived. They all keep their distance as we watch them warily. They start to chant something that we can't quite make out. The noise grows louder and louder until I'm able to determine that they're saying the same word over and over again. Malkaleth. The bonfire in the center of the camp begins to grow taller and brighter. The scents in the air rapidly change from the smell of the trees and soil and smoke to things more foreign. Much like the scent from Garrett, we don't recognize these, but there's something familiar about them. It's like there's something deep within us, something built into us, that understands what these smells mean. Images of raging blazes burning in infinite darkness fill our mind. The chanting reaches a deafening level. The cultists raise their arms and the bonfire explodes, sending flaming debris in all directions. We raise a hand to protect our face from the shrapnel. The fire spreads across the ground as it forms a circular inferno in the center of the camp. Everything around us falls silent. For a moment, we're sure that we've gone deaf. The crackling of the fire can no longer be heard, nor can the cultists chanting or even the beating of our own heart. At the same time, a great pressure pushes down on us. No, it's not just us. It's everything. The cultists are driven down to their knees before they lay flat on the ground. The wood of the buildings around us crack and break, and we can see small branches snapping off of nearby trees. It's only with extreme difficulty that we're able to remain standing, and even with all of our effort, we have to get onto all fours to do so. Something begins to rise out of the flames. Our mind struggles to process the sight of it. It's as if the being isn't meant to be seen by mortal eyes. It's vaguely humanoid in so much as it has a central body and limbs that look like arms and legs. There's no mistaking this as anything from this world. Its black and crimson body exists and does not exist at the same time, like we're witnessing some kind of mirage created from smoke. In the center of its featureless head is a single bright red light that seems to act as some sort of eye. Two large wing-like appendages unfurl from its back. Heat radiates outward from them, and dark ash drips from them like blood. That single red point of light points directly at us. For the first time, we feel small and insignificant. The wings beat once, and a scorching wind washes over us. It burns our fur and skin. We have to look away to protect our face from it. As we watch, the buildings and trees behind us burst into flames, and the nearby cultists are instantly incinerated to the point of no longer being recognizable as human. Malkaleth is risen, and all burns before it. The wolf bares its teeth at the otherworldly creature, but we know that we can't fight this thing. All of our heightened senses are screaming at us to run, to put distance between us and this thing so that we can regroup and come up with some sort of strategy. We don't like to leave a fight. There's nothing more distasteful to us. In this case, though, we are certain that we'll die if we remain. We turn and bolt towards the woods. Surprisingly, Malkaleth doesn't give chase. As we leave the clearing and plunge into the tree line, our hearing returns and the heavy pressure abates. Our body is close to the ground as we practically fly through the forest. Our nose catches the faint sense of petroleum and concrete. We're headed in the direction of civilization. The sun is fully set and the woods are dark. Even our eyes have a difficult time seeing in the thick gloom. It's dangerous to be running as fast as we are when it's this dim, but we don't slow down. After what feels like hours, we finally emerge on the other side of the woods. In front of us is the road that we had driven into Broken Bend on, and to our right is the town itself. We hesitate. As far as we know, the camper is still parked back at the bar, but it's not like we can drive in this form. For now, it's a better idea to get as far from the town as possible and contact Pembroke when we return to human form in the morning. The ground heaves, nearly throwing us from our feet. Even before we can steady ourselves, the road in front of us erupts with flames, the concrete splitting as hot boiling liquid pours out onto it. Like a god who has come to pass judgment, Malkaleth rises from the fiery crater and spreads its wings wide. All the plant life around us is instantly reduced to ash. Malkaleth reaches out with one hand and grabs us by the throat. Its grip is inescapable, and it burns hotter than any furnace. We cry out in agony as the hand tightens further. A part of us smells the scent of burning fur in the air as we struggle in vain. Malkaleth's wings beat again. Our cries turn to screams. Flesh is burning off of our body. In desperation, we claw at the hand holding us. We can't break its grip, but our efforts don't go unnoticed. Its wings pull back before coming forward to create a burning wind with the force of a hurricane. It opens its hand and the gust carries us away as if we're a leaf blowing in a breeze. We hit the concrete hard a great distance from where we started and skid to a stop dozens of feet from the impact point. The entire time, the burning is continuing. Even now that we're far from Malkaleth, the fire and heat continues to eat away at our body. It's all-consuming. All the fur has been burned away, and our skin is burning down to the bone. It isn't stopping. It's happening faster and faster. Within moments, we're going to succumb to this insatiable hellfire. Something else is happening as well. We feel our connection starting to fade. Whatever Malkaleth has done to us, it's burning both our body and our bond. It feels like our very souls are being melted away. The wolf is silent for a moment before sighing. Wait, I choke out through the agony. What are you? The air rushes out of our lungs as our body splits open down the middle. There's a new pain now as bones reconfigure and organs stretch and retract. The scream that sounds much different as it comes out from another throat. I emerge from the wolf and lie coughing on the ground. I'm alone. I can no longer hear the wolf in my head or feel its presence inside of me. The feeling of burning is gone, but I would have welcomed it back to sense the wolf again. The wolf sacrificed itself to trigger the change early so that I can live. I'm not unscathed. My body is covered in severe burns. I can smell the charred flesh even without my heightened senses. My vision is blurry, and know that I only have moments before I pass out. Malkaleth or one of its followers will be able to kill me without a fight. Not that I had been able to do anything against it when I wasn't in such bad shape. It's okay. This is okay. I'm following the wolf to wherever it's gone. I only wish that its sacrifice meant more, not for myself, but for it. It had wanted me to live. I'm sorry, old friend. There's a loud screeching sound as a car slams to a stop next to me. I'm too weak to lift my head, and my eyelids close. Right before I slip into the darkness, I hear a voice above me and feel a hand on my shoulder. Help me get him into the car, a man says. Everything fades to nothing. I stare out the window of the fast food restaurant, watching the combination of rain and snow drizzle down the glass as it reflects the neon signs from the building across the street. I'm a bit surprised that those signs are still on. It's approaching midnight, and I saw the last of the employees leave the business hours ago. I wonder if the signs are always left on, or if someone was in so much of a hurry to get the hell out of work that they forgot to turn them off. Speaking of employees, I glance over at the counter and see that the cashier is staring at me again. It's almost closing time, and she's anxious to start getting things closed down for the night. I'm tempted to stay seated at the table, but with a sigh, I stand up. There's no point in being annoying for the sake of being annoying. I refill my drink before putting up my hood and going out into the night. I don't even make it out of the parking lot before I have to stop. The sudden burning in my chest makes it difficult to breathe, and I have to clutch the side of a metal trash can to steady myself. It feels like an invisible hand made of fire squeezing my heart and lungs. I grit my teeth and wait for it to pass. Nothing else I can do. When the pressure finally releases, I gasp before taking a series of deep breaths. Something warm touches my hand. I don't have to look to know that it's blood that's dripped from my mouth. I let the rain wash it off before spitting more of it onto the concrete. Regaining my composure, I leave the parking lot and head in the general direction of my apartment. Although it's late and sleeting, I don't walk with any real sense of urgency. I'll get there when I get there. The process takes an hour. When I arrive at the rundown apartment building, I go inside and climb the stairs to the second floor. Each step brings with it a twinge of pain. I had originally answered an ad for an available first-floor apartment, but by the time that I got there,
It had already been rented out. The only other available one had been on the second floor. I hadn't had much of a choice, really. This is one of the few places in town that I could afford. All of the other choices were currently full. I lean up against the wall as I reach the second floor, taking a moment to rest. As I do so, I feel a bit of the old rage welling up inside of me. I hate being this feeble. There's never been a time in my life that I've been so fucking fragile. I disgust myself. The anger quickly fades, and the numbness returns. I shouldn't be alive. The severity of the injuries I had suffered in broken bed nearly 10 months ago should have been fatal. There was no doctor in the world that should have been capable of piecing me back together, even with the sacrifice the wolf had made in an effort to protect me. I hadn't been tended to by any normal doctors, however. Pembroke had seen to that. He transported my nearly lifeless body to an offshore cruise ship called the Atlantean Tribute. There, they had somehow managed to piece me back together. I wince as a sudden stabbing pain makes my left shoulder spasm. They hadn't gotten the puzzle put all the way back. A few of the pieces had been missing. Managing to finally catch my breath, I half walk, half stumble towards my apartment door. I pull my keys from my pocket and insert it into the lock. As I'm about to turn it, I hesitate and look back over my shoulder. I'd swear that I just heard something. I'm not sure exactly what that something was, though. As I listen intently, I don't hear anything further. I'm being paranoid. Again. Yet another wonderful side effect of my weakened state and, if I'm being honest with myself, the beating that I took in Broken Bend. I never would have thought that it'd be possible, but I'm fairly sure that I'm dealing with an extra large helping of PTSD. I go into my apartment and quickly close and lock the door behind me. Just because I recognize that I'm being paranoid doesn't mean that I can fight against that feeling. I cross over to the kitchen area. This isn't much of an apartment, just a small living room, bedroom, and a bathroom that is barely bigger than a closet. It suits my needs, though. I don't require much, though, just privacy and a place to sleep. I open the refrigerator and take out a container of orange juice. It's time to take my nightly medications, and I need something to wash them down with. The building's water tastes awful, so orange juice it is. With the container in hand, I go into the bathroom and turn on the light. It takes a moment for it to sputter on, and once it does, it's not very bright. I open the medicine cabinet and set the bottles that I'll need onto the side of the sink. There are 7 in total. This is actually an improvement, as originally I needed to take 9 each night. One by one, I make my way through the line of bottles, carefully making sure to use only the prescribed dose for each. I don't know what most of them do. All that I know is that I was specifically told by the doctor that stitched me back together to take each of them for a certain amount of time. Who was I to argue with a presumably trained medical professional? When I'm eventually finished dosing myself, I go back out into the living room and sit down on the couch, staring at the television but not turning it on. I feel numb, and it's not just from the medication. All the days filled with pain and repetition are having an effect on me. I don't live my life so much as I simply exist. I think back to the pills in the bathroom. I could stop this seemingly endless cycle of emptiness easily enough. Just stand back up, collect all the bottles, and start swallowing all of the contents. I'd be lying if I said that it's not a tempting thought. I close my eyes. I can't bring myself to do it. Yet another example of my current weakness. My eyes open as I hear a board creak in the hallway outside of my apartment door. I turn my head towards it and listen. There are 2 more apartments on my floor, but both of them are on the other side of the building. There's no reason for someone to be near mine. I continue to listen for several minutes. There's only silence. Eventually, I shake my head and sigh. It must have been the building settling. It's old, even by the standards of this part of town, and it's constantly producing odd sounds and even odder smells. Not the best environment for someone already suffering from paranoia. The wind and rain have picked up outside. The glass in the window on the far wall starts to rattle in its frame. I frown. Usually when the weather gets this bad, it's only a matter of time before... And there it is. Before I can even finish the thought, the power flickers before going out completely. An old building means old wiring. It's surprising that it ever works, really. It takes me a moment to realize that I'm hearing something. It's the sound of a television in the apartment below mine. The couple that lives there are hard of hearing. Because of this, their television is constantly turned to maximum volume. If I'm hearing it now, that means their power is still on. Pushing myself up from the couch, I limp over to the front door. Even the short amount of time that I've spent sitting has caused my muscles to tighten. I open the door and look into the hallway. The lights are still on. There hasn't been a power outage. It must be a blown fuse instead. There isn't a separate fuse box in each apartment. Instead, they're all located down in the building's basement. That's 2 flights of stairs down. I consider just waiting until morning to do anything about the power, but I reluctantly dismiss the idea. The temperature is already low outside, and it's expected to drop quite a bit more as the storm continues. My apartment will soon be freezing. There's also the risk of a pipe bursting if it gets too cold. As much as I want to, I can't ignore this. Shutting the apartment door behind me, I begin the painful task of going down the first flight of stairs. My medication has begun to kick in, and it's thankfully easier than it had been going up them when I had arrived at the apartment building. I grimace as I consider that I'm going to have to climb back up them when I'm finished with my task. I reach the first floor without incident and walk over to the door leading to the basement. It's partially open. I'm positive that it hadn't been when I had come into the building earlier in the evening. I must not be the only one that lost power. Opening the door all the way, I flip on the lights using a small switch on the wall to the right. The phosphorescent bulbs above the stairs come to life with a loud hum. The stairs themselves are ancient and narrow, and I move very slowly as I descend them into the basement. I reach the bottom and head to the breakers. I pass the washer and dryer that act as the building's laundry room as I do so. The dryer is running, making the same half-thump, half-screech that it always does. I wince as it hits a particularly painful note. The breaker boxes are labeled with numbers to indicate which apartment each is for, but they're so faded that I have a difficult time making out which is which. I manage to locate the one that corresponds to my apartment and press the button that releases the panel. It barely moves. I have to slide my fingers inside the gap to force it open. I furrow my brow, not immediately understanding what I'm seeing. The insides of the fuse box have been removed. All of the wires are exposed, and they're hanging in a tangled mess. They're cut in multiple places. I apologize for the mess, a voice says from the direction of the stairs. I didn't have time to tidy up. A cold chill runs through my body. I recognize that voice. I have to be wrong, though. It's impossible. Now, I realize that I'm a bit outside my jurisdiction, but I think we can both ignore that, don't you? After all, you didn't care much about such things when you came to my town. Heavy footsteps echo through the basement as the person begins to descend the stairs. Besides, we're old friends. No sense in being all formal about things. A pair of leather work boots appear, followed by jeans covered in dark stains that are still wet. It took me quite a while to find you. I didn't even know your name. Truth be told, I'm not sure if Stephen Tate is your real name or simply the one that you're currently using. The man arrives at the bottom of the stairs. It really is him. Peter Garrett, sheriff of Broken Bend, Montana. He should be dead. He was dead. I tore him limb from limb before crushing his skull in. Surprised to see me up and walking around? Garrett asks me with a mocking look on his bearded face. I get that. What can I say? Praise be to Malcoleth. I feel a strange mix of anger and fear. The unholy entity that had burned away the wolf and left me in my current state was also the being that Garrett and the rest of the town had worshipped as a god. Some of them, Garrett included, had been rewarded for this devotion with powers of their own. Despite the ruined and very dead condition I had left him in, Malcoleth must have somehow put Garrett back together again. It's not that different from what the doctors on the Atlantean Tribute had done for me. There's probably something poetic about that, but poetry is the last thing on my mind. You don't have to speak, Garrett is saying. Actually, I'd rather that you don't. I don't give a shit about Stephen Tate. I'm here for the other guy. Fuzzy one. One that fucking humiliated me. Garrett's face is twisted into one of hatred. There's something in his eyes that I don't immediately recognize, a look that makes me more nervous than I already was. The one that ripped off my arm and leg, the one that put its filthy paws on my head and killed me right in front of the one true God like I was nothing. Get him the fuck out here. I surprise myself when a choked laugh comes out of me. Garrett's expression slips for a moment as he watches me. For some reason that sets me off even more, and I laugh harder. What? Garrett demands. You finding something funny? Yeah, I guess I am, I admit, wiping at the tears on my face. He takes a threatening step forward. Care to share with the rest of the class? I highly doubt you're going to find it as funny as I do. Try me. The rational part of me knows that I should fear this man. Garrett would be dangerous on his own, but with the gifts Malcoleth has given him, he's even more so. In my current state, he could snap me in half without breaking a sweat. After all the months of pain and suffering, both physically and mentally, I just don't. What's he going to do? Put an end to all that fun? Sure, why not, I say. It's just that you come all this way, come back from the dead for God's sake, to get revenge on someone that doesn't exist anymore. Garrett pauses. What the hell are you talking about? You want the wolf? Well, I'm sorry to inform you of this. The wolf is gone. Your master saw to that. Burned it away without leaving behind a single trace. You came all this way for nothing. You're lying. No, I'm not. Tonight is the full moon, right? That's why you're doing this now, because you know the change only happens during the full moon. So, where's the werewolf, huh? Why am I still human? I see a flicker of doubt on Garrett's face. You're suppressing the transformation. I laugh again. Your boss really didn't tell you anything about how this works, did it? I couldn't control jack shit when it came to the change. If the wolf was still inside of me, we wouldn't be having this delightful conversation right now. Garrett's expression turns hard. Well, we're just gonna have to fucking find out for sure, aren't we? He comes at me. I'm ready for it, though. In fact, I've been hoping for it. He has all the advantages. My only hope is to outthink him. The best way to do that is to blind him with his own anger. I step to one side and catch him by the coat, using his own momentum to shove him into the wall underneath the breaker boxes. It's not enough to hurt him, barely enough to stun him, but it buys me enough time that I'm able to run to the stairs and head up towards the ground level. I have to get outside, give myself more space to work with. He's going to have a much easier time killing me if we stay inside the confined apartment building. I'm halfway up the steps when a sharp pain digs into my chest. I grit my teeth and keep going. I don't know how much of this my body can take, but I'm about to find out. I can hear Garrett coming after me. Reaching the top of the stairs, I ram into the front door and hurry out into the night. I don't even make it down the steps before he grabs me by the back of the neck and hurls me into the side of the building. I strike the bricks hard enough that most of the air is forced out of my lungs. Garrett doesn't seem to notice the pouring rain as he wraps the fingers of his right hand around my face. He lifts me completely off my feet before driving me down into the muddy, half-frozen ground. I feel something crack in my shoulder. Before my mind can register the pain, he's lifting me up again. Instead of smashing me back into the ground, however, he turns and hurls me through a nearby window. I go flying into one of the first-floor apartments and can't manage to get a hand up in time before the side of my head connects with an end table. Lights burst in front of my eyes, and as I collapse onto the wooden floorboards, I feel the warmth of blood start to run out of a gash in my forehead. Everything seems so far away. I hear someone scream. The voice is distant and muffled. Garrett is climbing through the window after me, and although I know it's only a short distance from where I'm crumpled up, it's like we're miles apart. There's another scream. With a glance down at me, Garrett steps out of view. Screaming suddenly stops. "That's better," he says. "Now, where were we? Ah, right." He kicks me hard in the side. He's been on the attack for less than 5 minutes, and I'm already beaten. "This isn't going to stop," he tells me. "I'm going to keep breaking bones and puncturing organs till you give me what I want." There's a second kick, and then a third. My mind is clearer now than it was a few moments ago. That's not a good thing. Each hit hurts more, and I'm more conscious of the punishment I'm taking. "Come on, damn it," Garrett growls. "Give me the fucking wolf." The point of his boot clips my forehead. It widens the open wound, and the blood is flowing faster. It covers my face in a crimson mask. There's a long moment of silence. I lay on the floor wheezing. I want to get up and make this harder on him. Make him earn it. My limbs won't cooperate. "It's really not in there anymore, is it?" Garrett finally asks in a voice barely above a whisper. More silence. I don't know how much time passes before I feel the air shift slightly. The blood running down my forehead is blinding me, but I can feel Garrett standing over me. He's not saying a word. The time for talking must be over. That means that he's decided he really isn't going to get what he wants, and is now going to finish things. A part of me, same part that I considered swallowing the bottles of pills earlier, welcomes it. I hadn't been able to bring myself to take my own life, but now someone else was going to be taking it instead. He's basically doing what I couldn't. I snort, which quickly turns into a gasp for air. I should thank him for that. Why does it have to be him, though? Garrett is an extension of the thing that has taken everything from me. A little puppet whose strings are being pulled by Malcoleth. Hasn't that ancient asshole made me pay enough of a price already? Pain starts to fade as my anger begins to rise. No, not anger. This is different. This is something that I haven't felt for months, not since Broken Bend. This is rage. A rage that burns so hot that I can feel it pouring out of me. Garrett's foot connects with the side of my face, and my head strikes the nearby wall. Before he can continue his assault, I reach up and forcefully wipe the blood away from my eyes. As I do so, I see that the heat I'm feeling isn't just from my increased blood pressure. There's actually steam rising up from my skin. I stare at it in incomprehension. I vaguely notice that Garrett is doing the same. Despite my confusion, however, the rage continues to build inside of me. My skin starts to tingle and my muscles tighten. What in the hell is happening? As I raise one arm to get a better look, I see black hairs begin to grow from it. They're coarse, almost sharp, and they're tightly grouped together. The nails of my fingers extend outward until they're almost 3 inches long. Even before they're finished, bones of my fingers crack and shift, making them more into claws than fingers. It takes me a moment to realize that I'm laughing again. It's a different kind of laughter, though. I can't describe the elation that I'm feeling. I don't give a shit about the injuries or the pain. All that matters is that it's happening again. I'd been so sure that the wolf was dead and gone, but I had been wrong. The wolf had never left me. It had gravely hurt, yes, and it had needed time to recover. Now it was back, and I wasn't alone anymore. The bones of my body are breaking and adjusting themselves. This would be the perfect time for Garrett to attack. He can tear me apart while the transformation is taking place. Yet all that he's doing is standing still, looking at me with a look that I recognize all too well. It's hunger. He doesn't want me. He wants the wolf, and he's willing to wait to get it. The transformation is complete. My body has been reshaped. Not enough, though. The transformation was over much quicker than it should have been. Something is wrong. I've only partially become the wolf. I can feel sharp fangs in my mouth, but my face hasn't reshaped into the wolf's snout and jaws. While there is fur covering me, it's growing out of my own flesh, not the animal skin that's supposed to replace my own. I also can't sense the wolf inside of me. Instead of its wild and yet comforting presence, there's nothing. I'm still alone. Maybe it isn't strong enough to come out yet. Or maybe it really is gone. And this change is just some remnant of its power that still exists inside of me. At this exact moment, though, it doesn't matter. This is enough. It's more than enough. I slowly get to my feet and bare my teeth at Garrett. He does the same and comes forward, but I leap directly at him and brutally slam him into the floor. It's easy. Not as easy as it is during a full transformation. It still doesn't take much effort. I don't even put my full strength into it. Heat flares all throughout my body. I gasp and back away from Garrett. It feels like everything is on fire. I haven't felt like this since I was being incinerated in Broken Bend. I clench my teeth, steam once again rising from my skin. The punishment that I had taken from Malcoleth hadn't stopped when the flames had ceased burning. It was still inside of me somehow. It takes me a moment to realize that this must have been locked away with the wolf. When it had emerged, even just partially, the fire that had consumed the wolf did as well. The bastard hasn't just taken everything from me. It has scarred me in such a way that it will keep taking from me. The rage continues to build in me. As it does so, it overtakes the burning. The pain is still there, but I don't care. All that I want to do is hurt Malcoleth the way that it has hurt me. Since I can't do that at this exact moment, hurting Garrett will just have to do. He's back on his feet now, and if my attack hurt him, he's not showing any signs of it. As we slowly circle each other, I recall our first fight in Broken Bend. He was stronger and faster than I had expected, although in my full transformation, I had been his superior when it came to both strength and speed. He was more skilled than I was, though, and his combat training had allowed him to make it a much closer match than it otherwise would have been. I don't have the same physical advantages that I had then. We're on a more level playing field, and if I'm not careful, he's going to take me apart piece by piece. I need to be smart about this. Before I can decide what to do, Garrett surprises me as he ducks down and goes for my legs. I manage to avoid his grasp. It's a feint, however, and he continues by adjusting his movement to drive his shoulder into my stomach. As we both collide with the wall, He straightens and grabs my wrists, preventing me from lashing out at his back with my claws. I'm not the only one that learned a few lessons during our last encounter. I snarl at him as a grin spreads across his face. That grin quickly turns to agony as he releases me and hurries back a few steps. He looks down at his hands with a look of incomprehension. My heightened senses pick up the scent of burning flesh. More steam is pouring out of me, and I can feel the buildup of heat in my body. The pain rises along with it. Every nerve feels like it's on fire. It doesn't matter, tell myself. Ignore the pain. Use whatever this is to finish the fight, and do it before the burning consumes you. I lunge forward and swing one hand towards Garrett's face. He puts his hands up in an attempt to protect himself. My claws are so hot that they pass right through skin, muscle, and bone with little effort. They rend the fingers from his hands and continue into the side of his face before tearing half of his jaw from his head. The air around me is boiling. My view is wavy. I'm looking at the world through heat rising off of pavement in the summer. It doesn't matter. Keep pushing. Garrett is attempting to scream as he backs out of the apartment and into the hallway. With his jaw hanging off, noise is distorted and wet. It cuts off completely as I clamp my teeth down on his throat. Twisting my head to one side, I rip it out and spit the gore onto the hallway floor. I vaguely notice that it's burned and charred. This would be enough to kill a normal man. Garrett is far from normal. He's already come back from being torn apart. I need to make sure that doesn't happen again. I allow my rage to take over completely. Everything goes red with blood and flames. I don't know how long I'm in this primal state. When I once again find my rational mind in control, there's nothing left of Garrett except stains and ash. With the man gone, the anger inside of me is rapidly dissipating. The heat is fading as well. By the time the transformation is reversed and I'm back to my human form, I'm covered in sweat, but back to my usual temperature. That had been close. Far too close. Towards the end, I'd felt my skin bubbling and the air leaving my lungs. A minute longer, and I would have been burned alive from the inside. I look up as I hear sirens in the distance. I need to hurry. Get back up to my apartment, throw a few things into a bag, and leave before the police arrive. The question is where I go from here. I need to go somewhere where I can work my way through this, figure things out. Somewhere safe and private. The sirens are growing louder. I'll have to worry about that later. Right now, I just need to run.
Have you ever been truly scared? I'm not talking about some drunk driver cutting you off in traffic, causing you to slam on the brakes and damn near crash into a ditch kind of thing, but that surreal and visceral terror that makes you question what's even real anymore. That I'm looking into the eyes of the thing that will end my life kind of horror. Okay, that's a little bit on the nose, but you get what I'm saying, right? Even as I record this, I'm trembling all over as though it's 20 below in my house. It's been a few days, but I'm still processing it, while barely having been able to sleep a damn wink since that night. When I do sleep, just about all I see is those damned eyes, cutting the reddened glow through the trees. Or just one of them, peering at me through my window, just waiting for me. Jill and I had met at a party a few months back, and we'd spent about every day together since. The fact that my name is Jack brought our mutual friends a lot of laughs, but it could get annoying at times. My buddy Darren has a cabin out in the woods out near Carter's Lake. We've been spending the long weekend with him and some other friends. We did a good bit of hiking over those days, to which we would return to the same jokes practically every damn time. So, did Jack and Jill go up the hill? Darren would ask with a smile. God damn it, man. Did you both have $1.25? He squeaked out in between chuckles. Yeah, I came down with $2.50, ha ha ha, Jill replied with a sigh. Of course, Darren's wife Sarah, her brother Dane, and his husband Blake all cracked up, while I joined my girlfriend in her exhausted sigh. It had been funny the first, 20 times or so? But Christ, it was getting old. Still, it had been a fun weekend to that point, even with the endless stream of the same lame punchlines at our expense. The cabin itself was absolutely gorgeous. 2 floors and 5 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom, a wide wraparound deck with a hot tub in the works. Darren came from a wealthy family, but he never shoved it in our faces or anything. I have a basic 9-to-5 gig, and Jill was a nurse, so neither of us had the most comfortable and carefree lifestyle, but it was nice to spend some time amongst the far more financially stable. Not to mention, we were able to stay in this beautiful place rent-free, so membership does have its privileges, I suppose. We'd been out there since that Thursday, so we were only 2 days into our 5-day stint at Le Chateau de Darren, as he liked to call it. As we approached that Saturday night, my buddy handed me one of his numerous credit cards and asked if I'd mind making a liquor store run. He told me he wanted a bottle of Glenlivet, a few cases of Killian's Irish Red, and whatever else Jill and I may want. Who was I to refuse? He even tossed me the keys to his Hummer, which I'd been dying to take for a spin. The cabin was nestled pretty deep in the woods, and the road that led to and away from it only barely qualified as an actual road, but the thick tires of the Humvee handled it so much better than my little Honda. It took me a half a mile or so to get a feel for it, especially with it being twice the size of my tiny Civic. But before I knew it, Jill and I were hauling ass in the direction of the far better paving of the main road. The sun had already began its descent for the night, and the liquor store was a good 20 minutes from the highway, 30 or so counting the bumpy graveled road through the woods, so it would be likely creeping up on 10 by the time we got back. It did feel nice to just spend a little time away from the group, and even better to be sharing the company of my lovely girlfriend. I had never met her before that party, but I was sure I didn't have a chance with her until she approached me. Back then, she had pink hair down to the middle of her back, whereas these days she was rocking a vibrant purple just down to her shoulders. It was the full tattoo sleeve and thick-rimmed glasses that grabbed my attention at first, as those are both features that I'd find absolutely striking, and she wore them quite well. I've always been something of a nerd myself, so after we spent a good couple of hours discussing everything from scary movies to anime, I was already on the brink of head over heels. I'm just a shaggy-haired dork from a small town on the other side of the state, so I could have never expected to have met someone who checked every single box I looked for in a partner. Sure, we had our share of pointless spats over our short time together, but that only made the makeup sessions so much more exciting. I almost wondered if we had those random disagreements with that factor in mind sometimes, but that may just be me. As we pulled up to the intersection of the highway, that was probably the first time I noticed the sounds. We had the radio blaring for most of the ride, while we god-awfully attempted to sing along, but I've always had a strange habit of turning down the volume at intersections, especially the busier ones. Don't worry, I haven't got some long-winded backstory about some 5-ton dump truck I didn't hear because the radio was too damn loud or anything. It's just one of those things I've always done since I started driving. Whatever the reason, that's when I heard the howling. I'm not entirely sure if that's what I'd call it, to be honest. We'd been hearing plenty of wildlife over the previous days and nights, so I don't know why this one jabbed a fork into my spine. Something about it, I don't know, felt off somehow. I didn't know if there were any wild dogs or wolves in the area, but I'd heard anything from birds chirping to squirrels squeaking around the cabin. There was the occasional barking, but I assumed that to just be some distant neighbor's pet or something. If this wailing, gargled howl did come from a dog, it was from a breed I'd never even seen or heard of before, and it sounded to be a veritable beast of one too. "You hear that?" Jill asked, looking as alarmed by the noise as I was. "Freaky, right?" I replied, attempting to sound unfazed, regardless of the fact that it sounded as though it came from maybe yards from where we parked, waiting for a break in traffic. "Wounded animal, you think?" Maybe so. We'll keep an eye out when we come back, yeah?" She just nodded before I turned onto the highway, cranking the radio back up to drown out any other potentially unnerving sounds. I still couldn't say why that random wail got me so shaken up. For one reason or another, something about it seemed as though it was directed at us, if that makes even the slightest bit of sense. It felt like it was somehow threatening us, like the old haunted house movies with "Get Out" painted across the walls and thick blood dripping down the drywall. Of course, I may well have been way overreacting. My mother always told me I was far too imaginative for my own good, so I tried to push it to the side for the time being, while continuing on her quest for a trunkload of booze. As predicted, it was getting close to 10 by the time we arrived back at the slender opening to the graveled road, and as much as I enjoyed driving Darren's Hummer, I was ready to kick back and relax. Jill was shifting in her seat, looking equally as tired of being on the road. I raised my hand to turn the volume down on the radio, before deciding not to follow through with my intersection ritual for once. Traffic had simmered down considerably, so getting back onto the rougher path went much smoother on the return trip. I could swear I heard that awful wailing again as soon as the front tires hit the gravel. I was sure it had just been in my head, until my girlfriend gave me a sideways glance, before wrapping her fingers around my hand resting on the center console. We didn't verbalize our concerns this time, though our vehicular karaoke had not resumed since we hit the main road a good 40 minutes before. When Jill screamed out after we had only been back on the road to the cabin for a few minutes, I damn near slammed the Hummer into a tree. "Jesus!" I yelled, fighting to keep control of the heavy vehicle. "Did you see that?" Jill asked through heavy breaths. "See what? What's wrong?" "The eyes! Did you see them?" "What eyes, babe?" "They were right next to us. Bright red eyes, just..." Her words were cut short when another wailing howl echoed from seemingly right behind us. "What the fuck is that?" I asked, knowing full well that my girlfriend had as few answers to give as I did. We were both freaked out while I pressed the pedal down with much more intensity than I had felt comfortable with in both a vehicle I wasn't used to, as well as a road I didn't know too well. I suspect we were on the same page, though. Neither of us knew what the hell was out there, nor did we want answers to that. I had to pull my hand free from her grasp to focus on keeping the heavy and wide SUV from drifting too far to one side or the other, but the next howl that caused me to jump and scream out sounded as though it was only just feet from us. When something slammed hard into the rear passenger side door, it took everything I had not to wrap the front bumper around the thick trees, while causing me to almost lose control of my bladder at the same time. The next wail was far more aggravated than the last, though I didn't exactly have any basis for comparison for what qualified it to seem that way. The next assault, this time against the door I sat directly beside, forced me to lose my ability to keep the wheels pointed in the right direction, causing us to careen to the right. Though there was only an overgrown field alongside the passenger side door at the time, Jill and I were both yelling out as the wheels bounced across the elongated blades of grass, while almost getting lodged in the occasional dip. I still fought to guide us across the less desirable path, hopeful to escape whatever the hell it was that seemed so set on tormenting us. That very battle came to a close when one final assault to the left side of the Hummer sent us tumbling across the grass and dirt, ultimately ending with a thickened tree trunk damn near crushing the roof down on us. We were both shaken, not to mention bruised and bloodied. Neither of us seemed to be badly hurt, though it was hard to get a full idea of her injuries, hanging by her seatbelts in a half-crushed Humvee. We were trying to make as little noise as possible while we worked to unbuckle ourselves, but I for one was certain that whatever knocked us from the road would be unlikely to leave it at that. Everything around us had fallen almost unnervingly quiet, accentuating every single movement we made to break loose from the belts around us. The smell of varying types of alcohol filled the cab, almost causing me to feel a little nauseous, even if I hadn't ingested a drop. Over the course of the heavy vehicle rolling, most of the bottles practically blew apart, as well as some of the cans. A mixture of beer, vodka, and whiskey rained across us, but fortunately the majority of the glass shards didn't make it up front. Jill got herself free before I did, but when I finally had to use my pocket knife to slice through the belt, I almost fell on top of her as she was now lying against the door closest to the ground. I tried to check out her wounds to the best of my ability, but fortunately they didn't look all that bad. She had a small gash across her left eyebrow, a few scrapes across her arms, and a nasty-looking cut across her left shoulder, where it appeared some of the glass from the shattered window of her door, or perhaps the exploding bottles, may have sliced into her. I had a thumping headache, and my right wrist was throbbing, feeling as though it had inflamed a good bit, but I felt fine otherwise, aside from a certain degree of shock setting in. I tried to peer through the windshield to see if I could catch a glimpse of our attacker, but the glass was cracked into spiderwebs and buckled outwards from the roof collapsing in on us. Jill and I were both breathing so heavily that I felt like a panting dog myself, which only flashed me back to the haunting howls of whatever seemed set on laying us to rest. While I crawled into the back seat in an attempt to see if I could make out anything around us, the headlights blinked before snuffing out, leaving us in practically pitch darkness. I worked my way back up front, extending my leg to push the windshield out. The crackling of the glass and the stretching of the rubberized seal around it provide another series of disturbing sounds against the otherwise silent forest. When the window finally gave way, what was left of it crashed to the ground, causing me to freeze in place while my chest tightened. Jill wrapped her fingers around my arm, causing me to jump from being so on edge at the time that any unexpected sensation was enough to almost make my heart explode. "Don't," Jill whispered, whimpering slightly as I reached out to pull myself through the opening I had just made. "We have to, babe. We can't just wait here for whatever that thing is." I felt her grip release, allowing my right arm to join the one that now held onto the window bracket. I was terrified. I wouldn't even attempt to convince myself otherwise, but I knew we just couldn't sit there and wait while hoping for the best. I felt the warped and crushed Hummer rock and tilt as I worked my way out into the field, next to the tree line we slammed into. Jill was visibly shivering as I held out my hand to help her out. She reluctantly reached out before another of those haunting wails howled out from a direction I couldn't pinpoint. "No, I can't," Jill said with tears pouring down her face, pulling back away from me. "You have to. I'm not gonna leave you here." No, you go. Get help." "Jill, I am not about to just fucking leave you here. We have to stick together. I'll protect you. You just have to." "How the fuck can you expect to protect anyone from something like that?" She was bordering on hysterical, belting out the words in between moans and whimpers. To be completely honest, I couldn't deny she had a point. How the hell could I do anything to keep her safe against something that can swat a massive SUV off the road like a fly? I didn't want to leave her behind, but there was no time to debate our situation with some sort of beast toying with us. The whole idea of that still felt almost ridiculous to even consider, but it was the only theory that made any sort of rational sense. "Okay," I said, still feeling uneasy about this course of action. "You stay here, and I'll go get help." She just nodded her head, still trembling all over. "Get into the back behind the seats. Stay hidden and keep as quiet as you can, okay? Another nod as she worked her way into the back, not taking her eyes off me. I didn't like this. I didn't like leaving her behind, but it would seem that I had little choice in the matter. I looked around while fishing my pocket for my phone. To my amazement, it was still functional, though the screen had a few new cracks. "Have you got yours?" I asked. She looked stunned for a moment before leaning back toward the front seat, feeling around for her purse. I crawled halfway back in to help before she finally grabbed onto the strap just in front of where she had been sitting. She pulled out her untarnished phone, looking back at me with a strange smile. "Anything happens, you call me, okay?" She let out a heavy and stuttered sigh. "No service. Fucking figures." She chuckled, but it was about as phony as a laugh could sound. "God damn it," I said with what felt like an even more forced and falsified giggle. "Just go. I'll be okay here. I'll be back as soon as I can, okay? I'll bring help, one way or another." She nodded again before, I love you," passed through her lips. We still hadn't spoken those words to one another, but I can't deny they had been lingering in my mind for a while now. Of course, I had most certainly hoped for a far better situation to reveal these feelings, but it still caused a warmth to spread through me I hadn't realized I was lacking from my extremities at the time. "I love you too," I said, with a far more enthusiastic smile than I knew myself to be capable. She beamed back at me, and that alone lit a fire under me to find a way to get us both through this in one piece. We just looked at each other for a few more moments until she shrank away behind the side of the passenger seat. "You stay hidden, no matter what you hear. If it sounds like hellfire is raining down around you, don't even think about coming out." She didn't speak, only raised her upturned thumb from behind the seat back. Were it not for the circumstances, I would have found it sorta cute, but I needed reassurance on this. "Baby, I need you to promise me." "Yeah, I hear you. I promise," whispered from the back. My heart was jackhammering as I turned to face whatever lay ahead of me, still feeling quite lost amongst the foreign surroundings. Fortunately, my eyes had grown somewhat accustomed to the darkness, with the full moon above lending a hand. I still couldn't figure out why whatever had attacked our vehicle had suddenly taken upon itself to disappear, but I wasn't about to let my guard down. I gripped the hilt of my pocket knife so tightly that I felt as though I was digging my fingernails into the flesh of my palm. I was sure that it wouldn't offer much protection against something that could easily force a heavy SUV from the road, but it was my best and only defense at the time. I crept onwards, still trying to remain as quiet as possible, which was no easy task with discarded branches and dried out leaves lining the ground beneath the grass, even in the open field I was crossing to seek out the road that led back to the cabin. I had no way of knowing how far I would have to walk to get back there, but I was sure I was closer to that than the highway we left in the dust. When I was finally able to make out the graveled road, the open field led me to another section of dense forest. It was much easier to keep myself concealed behind the trees, but after another good half-mile of hiking, I walked out into another wide-open area. I had been steadily growing more confident that I may actually survive this, when another wailing howl echoed across the darkened trees to the left of the road. It was closer, far closer than I think I even realized at the time. Though my breathing had begun to settle down over the last handful of yards, I was now on the brink of hyperventilation, frozen in place, erratically cutting my eyes across the trees. It was around that time that I came face to face with a far more visceral and heart-stopping fear than I had ever imagined possible. It took me a second to realize that the glowing red lights shining from between the trees or the illumination of two eyes peering back into mine. I heard a gnarled growling sound that came from just below where the twin glowing eyes softly lifted and lowered, as though whatever they belonged to was panting with heavy breath. I could feel the blood draining from my face while the nausea of gazing into my mortality churned in my stomach. As the rough growl grew more aggravated, the eyes sunk lower, giving me the image of something preparing to pounce. It happened so quickly that my mind could barely grasp what I was seeing. The rumbling and gargled sound blending with the snapping and shattering of branches and bark when the behemoth burst from the trees right at me. I screamed out, feeling as though the throbbing veins in my temples were about to erupt, squirting a healthy stream of blood to each side. I brandished my small pocket knife as though I were wielding Excalibur itself, when in reality I had a fucking 3-inch blade trained on what looked to be about 10 feet of darkened fur and muscle, speeding right at me. I felt my body soaring backward through the air after a giant hand swatted me across the chest. I knew something was broken when I made contact with the ground, but I was in so much shock I had no way to know what I had snapped, only that it hurt like a son of a bitch. I raised my dizzy head to see that thing charging right at me on all fours. It looked like an enormous wolf, though its eyes shone that eerie glow, illuminating the elongated, wrinkled snout, while thick drool slobbered from its gaping maw. I had no time to get back to my feet, so I rolled forward, swinging my pitiful little blade through the air before me, just in time to make contact with something. I don't know where in the beast I hit, but it let out an ear-piercing squeal that almost caused me to retch across the grass I perched on. Before I had a chance to react, the thing leapt from before me, disappearing back into the trees. I looked down at my trembling hand to see thick, dark blood dripping from the short blade, along with a chunk of black fur wedged into the hinge of the folding mechanism. "Run, you dumb bastard!" The voice in my head practically yelled at me. I still knelt in place with my mind reeling. "Fucking move!" I lifted myself from the grass, feeling no strength from the legs that twitched and shivered before I convinced them to start running. My chest was burning, but I had no time to investigate how strongly the blood was flowing from the gashes left in the wake of the claws that carved through my shirt and skin. Everything hurt, from my back to my legs, along with what I assumed to be a broken rib or 4, as they stabbed into my insides as I forced myself forward. As my side split, I almost allowed myself to slow down, until another anguished and angered howl bellowed from behind me, convincing me to push through the pain that almost caused me to break. The agony had grown almost impossible to tolerate, but I couldn't let up. Not only had I royally pissed this thing off, but I still had to find a way to get back to Jill, who I prayed to God was still safe. Maybe 20 or 30 feet ahead, I saw a familiar ridge, which, if memory serves, was right at the edge of my friend's property. My painful sprint had slowed considerably, especially since I was now running uphill, but hopefully towards salvation. I reached the top of the ridge where the ground leveled back up again, to sure enough see the lights from Les Chateaux de Darren just ahead in the distance. My lungs were practically begging for me to allow them to relax for a second, but when I heard that growling and panting wheeze coming from behind me, accompanied by 4 heavy feet beating against the surface of the ground, I had to force them to work much harder than I had up until this point. I screamed out through my straining breath, pleading with as much effort as I could for my friends to hear me as I forced one foot in front of the other. There are no words to truly describe either the amount of pain I was in or the true horrifying fear that I was experiencing as I heard those weighted paws trample the earth beneath them. I just kept yelling out, practically squealing the words, "Help me!" over and over until I finally saw the door open ahead of me. "Who the hell is out there?" Darren's voice called out. "It's Jack! God damn it, help me!" "Jesus Christ!" I heard call out as I neared the cabin with my feral pursuer sounding closer to me by the second. I was so close, but I just knew I would be torn to ribbons by the time I reached the open door. I could feel the foul breath and sticky saliva spritzing across the back of my neck, while the jagged bones still worked on ripping through my insides. When I heard the panting only inches from my ear, a gunshot rang out through the night, before a second caused another shrieking squeal to wail out from almost right beside me. Just before I fell onto the wooden steps of my friend's front deck, I heard those scampering feet quietening more and more as they sped away, back in the direction from which I had fled. I just stared up at my friends who had all gathered up on the patio, feeling a sense of indescribable gratitude, before everything went black. I don't think I had been out of it for long, as I was still pretty winded when my eyes finally blinked back open. Everyone in the house was crowded around where they had carried me to the cozy couch, and honestly felt a bit lost for a moment. As soon as the recollection of what I had been running from crashed back into the forefront of my mind, like a Humvee colliding with a thick and ancient tree, I sat straight up, instantly wincing from the pain of my likely broken ribs. I gripped my hand around where the agony screamed from, to find out I now had bandages tightly wrapped around me. It did help, but it would seem that was what caused me to still gasp for breath, though not nearly as much as during my race against what I was certain to be inevitable death and dismemberment. I looked down to see blood seeping through from beneath the gauze, before looking back up to my friends. "How bad is it?" "Not too bad," Darren said. "Can't tell how many ribs are broken, but the cuts could have been a lot worse."
"What was that thing?"
Sarah asked, rubbing the goose flesh on her arms. I just shook my head. I had no words to offer, as I had no idea what it was myself. My mind almost wanted to speak the word werewolf, but I still wasn't so fucked up in the head that I was ready to believe in such a thing. If I had to wager a guess, given the size of the beast, I don't know, Dogman, maybe? I had heard of rumored sightings of these things as close as Tennessee, but I still saw them to be just as fictional as Bigfoot, or fucking werewolves for that matter. "We called the police," Blake said. "There was an ambulance coming too." "Where's Jill?" Dane asked. I had to give it to my friends that, regardless of the fact I had arrived on foot, not even Darren had asked about his vehicle, which I could only hope still contained a safe and healthy Jill. I went on to explain everything that had occurred since I headed out what felt like hours ago by this point. Had it not been for the fact a couple of them had witnessed the enlarged beast chasing me down, I doubt I could have ever convinced them to believe a word of it. Given the circumstances, I didn't have to ask them to take my word on faith. Darren told me I had been out of it for a good half hour, which caused me a stab of guilt, as I knew my girlfriend had to be beside herself with fear and concern by now. Not to mention I was beyond terrified that the beast had returned to where I left her. "I gotta go back out there. I need to get back to her," I said, getting back to my feet, while pitifully attempting to pretend I was in any fit state to get back on the road.
"We called 911 as soon as you got inside,"
Sarah said.
"They should be here any minute."
"She's alone out there," I insisted, cutting my eyes to each of my friends one by one. "She's alone out there with that thing." Darren rubbed the top of his head, as he often did when thinking something over. He was a big, intimidating guy, standing about 6'4" and substantially more muscled than I. Given his carefree lifestyle, he worked out religiously, as he had little to no other responsibilities. But even as threatening as he could appear, he looked as scared as I felt about the idea of leaving the house. "Have you tried to call her?" he asked. "We didn't have service down there." "Worth trying anyway?" I pulled out my phone and clicked on her icon, only to get her voicemail message after what felt like an eternal ringing. Just hearing her recorded voice on the other end was enough to convince me to get back to her, regardless of whether or not the police were right around the corner. I looked back up at Darren, shaking my head when I couldn't reach her, while painfully getting back to my feet again. "I can't wait, man," I said, still shaking my head. "Yeah," he said, nodding his head while glancing at his wife and back to me. "I got your back, brother." "I'll come too," Blake said, with Dane agreeing he would also join us. "No sense in all of us going," Darren said. "Dane, you stay here. Keep an eye on things until the cops show up. Cool?" Dane and Blake were both pretty stocky as well, with the latter having played football through high school and college, only to have an injury put an end to his dreams of making a career out of it. Honestly, my 5'10", 165-pound ass looked like a kid next to the other guys of our humble little group. I would joke from time to time that I could still kick their collective asses, as I had seen a good share of scraps in my younger years, but even I couldn't take myself seriously on that one. It would usually bring us a lot of laughs, but there was no levity in the room that night. I didn't feel great about leaving Dane and Sarah behind to fend for themselves if that thing worked its way back up to the house, but they were likely far safer here than where we were headed. Darren had quite the impressive collection of firearms, a few of which we would be bringing along for a ride out into the night. Both of the friends we left behind had learned how to shoot a decent degree of accuracy over the years, but I couldn't predict how our mutually trembling limbs would affect that. I was hopeful that that would not be put to the test, and that was wishful thinking at best. "If the police show up while we're gone, tell them where we're headed," Darren said to his visibly shaking wife, to which she returned a nod and a strained smile. I trained the rifle my friend handed me out into the night, with the mounted flashlight beaming across the trees, while we loaded up into Blake's truck. As we headed back out onto the gravel road, I felt my pulse throbbing beneath the flesh of my wrist and neck, while I continued to glare out of the window of the back seat, in search of glowing red eyes between the trees. Every bump in the road almost caused me to jump, as my mind revisited the sensation of being forced into the overgrown field we were now in search of, and I could only hope that Jill was still safely awaiting my return. We were only a couple of minutes into our quest when we noticed the flickering blue lights ahead. For the briefest moment, this gave me some semblance of hope, and that was to be short-lived when we arrived at the police car. It had been flipped over onto its roof, halfway off to the side of the road. The light still strobed from the front grille, but those on top had been crushed, along with most of the upper frame. I think every one of us lost access to our ability to breathe as we looked upon the wreckage, with deep gashes torn into the fiberglass frame of the car. Given that it was on his roof, half on and half off the road, guiding the large truck around it would be no easy task, but we also had to check if anybody had survived the attack. I wanted nothing more than to just get back to my girlfriend, but the chances of making it to her were growing slimmer by the moment. "We gotta check it out," Darren said, attempting to hide the quaking in his voice. "I'll go. You guys, you're beat to shit, man. I got this," he continued, already cracking open the passenger side door. "I'll come with," Blake added, cranking the column shifter into neutral. "It's your truck, man. You should stay. Let me, dude. Someone has got to stay with the truck, and you're in no fit state to help if anybody is still in there. Take the wheel and ram the shit out of that thing if it shows up, okay?" I wasn't a fan of this plan by any means, but he wasn't wrong. If they ended up having to pull anyone out of the wrecked police car, not only were my friends considerably stronger than I, but I was even more weakened at the time. I reluctantly climbed out of the back seat, taking my place at the helm, after Blake got out with his shotgun in hand. "If there's anyone inside, don't stick around. Worst case, maybe we can shove the car to the side of the road with the bumper." Yeah, it wasn't the most reaffirming thing to say, but I needed to add something. I felt almost useless at the time, but I still wanted to help. Had it not been for the fact that I was the only one who had any idea where the Hummer was currently located, I would have likely been laughed back at the cabin. But I had to believe we could pull off this piss-poor attempt at a rescue. They got alongside the half-crushed car, and while Blake kept his gun trained at the trees, Darren peered inside. He shone a flashlight through the buckled windshield before backing up and giving a shrug. He shook his head to our mutual friend before looking back at me, shrugging once more. As they headed back toward where I sat, with my back stiff as a board and my ribs throbbing, gunshots echoed from somewhere ahead before a blood-curdling scream followed only seconds later. The guy sprinted back to the truck, while I slid out to leave the driver's seat vacant for his pilot. Without a word, Blake pushed the pedal down, ramming his bumper against the overturned car. That first hit spun it in place, before a second caused it to skid off the embankment, finally clearing enough room for us to pass. We didn't waste any time before speeding in the direction of where the scream still lingered in the air, though we did not speak a word, as we were all in a similar state of reluctance and fear. Were it not for the fact that we had nowhere else to go but back to the cabin, I'm sure we would not have felt the urge to seek out the source of the gunshots. Unfortunately, we knew this was leading us straight back to the belly of the beast. Well, hopefully not so literally. I think we all gasped at the same time when the headlight shone across the body that was lying in the middle of the graveled road. Well, what remained of the body anyway. Blake slammed on the brakes, causing the heavy truck to almost slide right into the mutilated torso of what was once an officer of the law. Given the fact that all that was left of the poor bastard was the upper half of his body, a grizzled and torn left arm, and a head that no longer had a jaw attached, we would have done no more harm to the guy if he had skidded the tires right across him. Somehow, I think the sounds of the remains crunching and cracking under the wheels would have made every one of us lose the meals we were collectively fighting to keep in our stomachs at the time. Blake was heaving for breath, while Darren shook his head from side to side, muttering under his breath in words I couldn't make out. "We need to move, man," I said, trying to snap my friend out of his seemingly frozen state. "Blake, we need to..." My words were cut short by something heavy landing on the bed of the truck, causing the back tires to burst under its weight. Before any of us had a chance to react, well, other than screaming out at the top of our lungs, glossy black and sharpened claws dug through the roof of the truck, quickly pulling back and tearing the cab open like a damn sardine can. Without a word, each of us threw open our doors, running for the woods on either side, with the echoed gargling howl wailing out from behind. As Darren made for the tree line on one side, Blake and I headed for those on the left. I looked back to see the beast turning to face Darren, preparing to pounce. Just as I raised my gun to unload it, Blake fired his shotgun, cocked it once and fired it again, each shot tearing into the fur and flesh of the creature. In less than a fraction of a second, it leapt from the flattened truck bed, slamming against and snapping the thick bark of the tree Blake tried to hide behind. I spun to point the barrel of the gun against the thing before it pulled back as a cloud of splinters and shrapnel rained down upon me. I straightened back out, holding my friend by the head, who wriggled and whimpered, desperate to break free from the tight grip. I tried to get a clear shot, but my arms were shivering so aggressively that I feared I would inadvertently fire into the flesh of its hostage. Each of the 5 claws pierced into the flesh, leaking fresh blood from around them. As the creature held Blake outstretched before him, I finally steadied my aim as much as I could, training the barrel on the beast's feet. But when gunfire echoed from the other side of the road, I felt my heart skip with a degree of hope. Darren landed a barrage of bullets into the monster, but his assault was cut short as blood spurted from the immense hand that held Blake by the head before he was launched towards Darren, flattening them both to the ground beside the tree line. There was a brief moment of relief when I saw Blake meet Darren on the bumpy ground. Of course, the feeling did not last long before I turned my eyes back to the crushed and dismembered head still firmly held between the monster's clawed fingers. While I stood there, rooted to the ground, staring blankly up at the beast, I finally took in the sight of what I was sure would be the last thing I saw in this life. It stood at least 10 feet tall on its hind legs, though I wasn't always the best judge of such things. The entirety of its bulky and muscular body was lined in thick black fur, but I could still make out the wide, pulsing veins across its enormous arms. Its head was similar to a wolf or a dog, but far more sinister in its features. Furrowed and wrinkled brow, drooling mouth filled with sharp, yellow teeth, dripping with the same shade of ruby red that spilled from where Blake's head used to connect to his neck, with half of what looked to be his spine dangling from it. It stood on equally as bulging legs as its arms, but they were far more animalistic than its upper half, which was more human in its contours. The scarlet glow from the creature's eyes carved into the darkness, accentuating its feral expression, making it appear even more ravenous as it stared down at me. Its entire body flexed with every deep inhale and exhale, making it appear as though it was quite ready to enjoy the fresh meal that trembled before it. As it glared down at me, I collapsed to the ground, with the realization that my life was about to end, causing my legs to feel weakened and numb. I stared up to meet the beast's eyes, filled with that illuminated fury, and I knew I would never see the world outside these woods again. The bullets that had been fired from Darren's gun left oozing holes across the beast's chest, arms, and back, but it seemed unfazed by any of them, regardless of how such a thing had caused it to flee only a little while before. It was at that point that I knew it had been fucking with me this whole time. If at least 6 bullets didn't so much as cause it to wince, a single shot would have never forced it to retreat, nor the pitiful swat of my pocket knife. I looked over at my friends, one of whom who had already fallen to this horrendous creature, and the other seemingly passed out beside him. I hoped he was just sleeping it off anyway. I almost jumped out of my skin when the giant hand finally released its trophy to the ground, before echoing its stomach-churning howl across the still forest. This is it, I thought as I sat on the grass, unable to convince my legs to do any more than just shiver beneath me. I had no idea why it hadn't finished the job yet, but I could only assume that it enjoyed the scent of my fear. I couldn't help but wonder if it wanted to allow me a moment to fully appreciate what would be putting my life to a grisly end this night. Perhaps it wasn't quite ready for the festivities to come to an end just yet. Hell, maybe the fucker was just a little winded after flipping cars and tearing its victims apart. How the hell could I even think about figuring out what was going on in that monstrous noggin? I could feel rage setting in, both at what he had done to my friend, as well as the torment it had put me through. Yes, I was screwed and I knew it, but I would be damned if I was just going to sit there and take it. Sure, this was likely to end only one way, with my blood blending into the crimson puddles that already lined the road and grass. But I had one goal in mind. One simple thing that I wanted to accomplish before I coughed out the blood from my own strewn apart chest cavity. I wanted to take at least one of those glowing eyes from the beast. Maybe even both if I had the strength left before the end. As I slowly lifted myself from the ground, my enemy hunched over slightly, seemingly in preparation to pounce. My heart was jackhammering again, but I had already achieved a certain degree of resolve now that I had accepted my fate, so I wasn't about to back down. It looked a little startled when I began to charge toward it, lifting my gun to unleash another assault of gunfire into its fur-lined flesh. It roared out while it crouched down, before leaping into the air, upwards and toward me. I didn't let up on my attack, training the barrel of my gun on him as he soared through the night air at me. Having kept it in my sights the whole time, I managed to jump to one side before it slammed hard onto the ground, burying its clawed paws into the dirt. I still wouldn't stop, not until the clicking of the trigger signified that I'd spent my load, causing an all-too-familiar panic to reawaken within me. Yes, I had riddled the beast with holes, each of which leaked and squirted darkened fluids across the matted fur, but I hadn't even remotely slowed it down. Once more I got to my feet, still wielding the empty gun like a worthless shield, before sprinting toward the snarling beast again. As soon as I got close enough, I swung the stock of the gun right at it, managing to catch it across the jaw. It gave a satisfying yelp before it swatted at me with its claws outstretched, tearing through the flesh of my shoulder like a hot knife through butter. I screamed more from the sound of the deep gashes being carved into my tissue as the wounds themselves went numb almost immediately. as did the feeling in the fingertips of my left hand. I attempted to raise the arm, but I could barely get it to twitch, let alone move. Blood gushed from the 4 deep rips, which had surely torn through tendons and arteries alike. If nothing else, I thought, maybe I'll bleed to death before I get shredded to ribbons. I gave an exhausted chuckle while backing away from the beast, who still had my blood and skin pasted to its fingers. It stalked toward me with its hand outstretched, as though it sought to rub it in my face that it had cut me deep. I continued my lifeless giggle while feeling around behind me with my one functioning arm, hoping to be able to guide some sort of path of escape. When my back followed my fingers against a thick tree trunk of a tree, I laughed even harder than before, with the madness of my impending death causing my mind to shatter. The beast cocked its head to one side, stopping in place to glare at me. It appeared to be studying me, as though it had never observed such a reaction from any of its prey. "Just do it, you piece of shit," I said through gritted teeth, in between my pointless laughs. Naturally, the beast ignored my words, though it crouched down on all fours to face me directly. It still wore that furrowed and seemingly angered brow, but those glowing red eyes peered into mine as though it were curious in some way. As we gazed upon one another, I felt my own brow wrinkle, while I allowed the smile to widen across my face. Yes, I was certain my bloody demise was only moments away, but that bastard did not even realize he had given me a chance to achieve my one final goal. I tilted my head this time, hoping to let my face be committed to the monster's memory, before I quickly carved my pocket knife directly into its right eye. It felt as though it popped as I attempted to force my blade deeper, hoping to pierce right into its goddamn brain pan. Darkened, pus-like fluid spewed across my hand, while a squealing howl shrieked from its gaping maw. It jerked back before swatting at me again, sending me soaring across the air against the bark of yet another tree. The impact caused my head to spin, while the shrill wail of the beast caused my stomach to empty everything I had consumed over the past few days. It was a sound unlike anything I had ever heard, or could even hope to describe with any degree of accuracy. I was only vaguely aware of the new injuries from the collision with the trunk while I retched across the forest floor. I attempted to hold my body up with my one good arm, feeling as though it was filled with more gelatin than bones at this point, while lifting my head to glance back to where I had fled from. The beast had rolled onto its back, clutching its enlarged hands over the spewing socket. I took the opportunity to force myself back onto my trembling legs once more, before weaving in and out, between and around the trees of the dense woods. I could feel my body weakening, and I was sure I was in far more pain than the shock would allow me to admit, but I still had to attempt to track down where I left my girlfriend. I was still certain that I would not survive this, especially with my body growing colder by the second, likely due to the copious amounts of blood that still leaked from my shredded shoulder. But I had to reach her. Had I the slightest ability to second-guess my actions at the time, I may have realized that if I should find her, I would have likely led the creature right to her, but my common sense had spurted from my open wounds as much as whatever life force I had left. As I continued my escape, I pulled off my belt, wrapping it around my ruined shoulder. I bit down in an attempt to muffle my scream as I tightened the leather down, though I had little doubt the beast could still smell my blood and piss-soaked jeans, even if I could remain silent. It wasn't until the trees gave way to that wide open field again that I knew my time was running short. I had still been aware of the moans and whines of the beast as I sped away from it, but those agonizing sounds had now been replaced by noises filled with pure and exhilarated rage. If I'd had anything left in my stomach or bladder, the splitting and shattering wood a ways behind me would have caused every ounce of it to spray across the long grass. I still kept pushing forward, refusing to look back, until I heard one last tree topple to the ground, only some feet behind me. I finally stopped in place, realizing that I was at the end of my journey, while I felt whatever blood I had left drain from my face. I turned to see the behemoth standing directly at the tree line, panting heavy breaths while staring me down with its only functioning eye. I can't exactly say his facial expressions were in any way relatable, but I suspect that there was nothing short of pure hatred etched across the one I had stared into. I clenched my fists, preparing to face the inevitable as the thing took long strides on its hind leg towards me. My heart was in full panic mode, feeling as though it was fit to burst, but I knew there was no point in running. I did enough, I thought, as I allowed a smirk to reach across my lips while gazing into the lone, red, glowing eye. I even chuckled again, but it didn't seem to pique the interest of the creature this time. It just kept drawing closer, hunching over as it approached, spreading out the clawed fingers to strike the second the gap was closed. "I left my mark on you, you piece of shit," I said, smiling wider and more maniacal. "How's that lack of depth perception treating you?" I shouted, laughing like a madman. "That's right, buddy boy. You'll never forget my sorry ass, will you?" It released a high-pitched, snarling howl that almost turned my hair white, damn near causing my legs to give out from beneath me again, but I stood my ground. I wouldn't give it the satisfaction of showing my fear, not if I could help it anyway. "Give me your best shot, you little bitch." "I fucking dare." The instant it happened, I barely had a chance to even register it. The beast was almost right on me, crouching down even lower than before, as though it meant to snatch me up and launch us both from the ground. When I heard the explosive sounds of multiple gunshots in succession, I almost thought it was my eardrums rupturing from my head being crushed at first. I cut my eyes to where the shots came from, just in time to see Darren next to what looked to be another police officer, both unleashing their weapons on the thing before it leapt from before me to where they stood. "Run, Jack!" my friend yelled out as the thing swiped his hand across him before digging its claws into the side of the cop. I wanted to move, but my legs wouldn't budge. I stood, rooted in place, horrified at the sight of the officer's left arm being peeled away from his shoulder like the wing of a fly, spraying thick blood and strips of shredded tissue across my friend. His squealing scream echoed across the field before the yellowed and jagged teeth gouged into his throat, turning the shrill sound into no more than a gargled whimper. Darren had dropped to the ground and was sliding away from the horrendous sight, with his chest heaving blood from the quartet of deep, grizzled gashes across him, trying to force the hand which held his gun up from the gravel. The creature let out another awful howl as it dropped the limp body of the fallen cop to the ground. The fresh corpse made a moistened, slapping sound when it hit, which finally allowed me to take control of my legs again. I ran toward the road as the beast stalked toward my friend. It appeared in no hurry to get to him, as it had left Darren quite the mess already. It almost looked like it was just taunting him, snapping its jaws and growling as it drew closer. Time slowed around me as I approached the road, while the monster reached down to pull my friend from the ground. I was only vaguely aware of the new sounds at first, as the only thing I could focus on was the large, fur-lined hand wrapping around both of Darren's legs as it lifted him from the gravel. I could hear my friend screaming his own tormented howl, while the beast tightened the fist which held the twin shins, crushing the bones within to little more than fragmented pulp. I cut my eyes across the road in search of the gun the cop had been discharging into the horrendous monstrosity, when a flickering stream of blue lights brought my attention back to the real world. The growing sound that accompanied my friend's anguished screams was that of multiple sirens drawing closer by the second. The monster had no chance to react, as it was only paying attention to its prey. When the armored grille of a police car made contact with the legs of the beast, I witnessed its bones snapping backward before it tumbled across the hood and onto the windshield of the car. I ran to Darren as he slipped free of the creature's grasp, tumbling off to the side of the road. More gunfire erupted, along with a variety of growls and whines. There were tearing sounds of both cloth and something leather-like being sliced through, but it all faded into the background as I sped to Darren's side. From what I could tell, he was unconscious, but still alive. The 4 gnarled rips across his chest and stomach were gushing blood, and his legs hung limply to each side below the knee. But I did whatever I could to shield him from the battle being waged on the road. Over what felt like minutes, the sounds of veritable war, anguished screams, and guttural growls thinned out to only moans and whimpers. Voices called out to one another, into and out of radios, while I felt a blanket being draped over my back. I don't know how long I just sat there with my mind reeling from the shock of the night's events, while the paramedics worked on doing what they could for Darren. More vehicles were lining up behind those who had initially arrived on the scene, but it was all a blur to me. That was until I finally remembered why we came back out here in the first place. Without so much as speaking a single word to any of the police or medics, I charged back toward where I hoped the wrecked Humvee would still be resting. Some voices called out from behind me, but I wouldn't stop. I had to get to her. I had to know if she was still alive out there. It took little time to arrive back at the large SUV, still partially wrapped around the thick tree. The fact that we had been this close the whole time caused my heart to race once more. As soon as I got there, I slammed my hand against the hood before attempting to crawl back through the busted-out windshield.
Jill, baby, I'm here. Please tell me.
I don't know if the sight of her raising her hand from behind the driver's seat as I pulled myself through the opening made my heart settle more or beat even harder. As soon as I wrapped my fingers around hers, her beautiful face peered out next to it.
Are you okay?
I asked, still heaving for breath, while an officer and a medic gently pushed me to the side to help her out of the buckled vehicle. She just nodded with her eyes welling up. She cut her eyes to my blood-soaked shoulder and back to mine.
Are you all right?
Yeah, I am. I am now.
I didn't come out,
she said, wrapping her arms around my neck while tears streamed down her face.
Even when it sounded like hellfire was raining down around me, I didn't come out.
Like I said in the beginning, it's only been a few days since that night, and I still don't quite have my mind right. My shoulder is still pretty messed up, but my doctor is confident that I can at least get back partial mobility. I got to come back home yesterday, and Jill and I are already talking about moving in together soon. I'm so glad that she managed to avoid all of the madness of that night, but she's been my rock since then. God knows I would have completely broken without her by my side. Darren is still in the hospital, but his prognosis looks decent. The gashes across his torso were deep, but luckily they didn't shred into anything too important. His legs, though, will never be the same. They had to take his right below the knee, as the damage was far too extensive, but after a couple of surgeries they managed to save the left. He's holding up surprisingly well, but he and I both have some serious physical and psychological therapy to look forward to. Dane will likely be recovering from the loss of his husband for quite some time. We're all pretty messed up about it, but nobody can deny that he was a damn hero. I know I would have never survived without his help, and neither would Darren. Blake was a good man, and I don't think we'll ever forget him, but I truly hope that Dane will see the other side of these hard times. He deserves better than this. Regardless of all who fell while attempting to put an end to the beast of Carter's Lake, I believe it's still out there. The battle was brutal, claiming the lives of a total of 4 officers, while leaving several more with scars that will never fade. But I think we at least heard it,
From what I was told, the creature leapt back into the trees after putting up a fight that nobody expected to survive, but it left a lot of blood in its wake. Yeah, they heard it, but I was the one who took something from it. I can neither ask nor expect anybody to believe any of this. There were no reports of what took place in the woods that night, and some government officials made us sign some non-disclosure forms, while practically swearing on a stack of Bibles that would never speak a word about what we saw. But I've never been much of a religious man. To my knowledge, they're still out there, investigating those awful events, and possibly attempting to hunt down the beast. But I doubt it will turn out how they'd like, one way or another. I still hear it at night, the sounds of the beast, as well as the screams of its victims. I close my eyes, and it's as if that guttural howl is calling out from behind the glass of my bedroom window. Jill says she doesn't hear it, so it likely is little more than some significant mental scarring. Still, even though I live a good many miles away from where we spent that ill-fated weekend, now and then I still see one single glowing red eye blinking from the darkness. And maybe it is all in my head, but perhaps I have not seen the last of the Dogman of Carter's Lake. From what I've read online, these sightings come in cycles, so I can only hope that this one has come to a close. Of course, it's very possible that this was only the beginning.
Okay, yes, I admit it. At this exact moment in time, I'm just the slightest bit drunk. I haven't had all that much to drink, just a couple of bottles of wine. No, wait, sorry, I said that wrong. They were small cases. I meant to say a couple of small cases of wine. The ones that only have 4 bottles instead of 6, though, so they don't really count as cases. I think there might have been a few shots in there as well. It's hard to tell. Things are a bit of a blur after the tequila. I'm pretty sure that's all it was, though. The wine, the shots, and the tequila. After the 4th round of beers. Like I said, I'm just a little bit drunk. It doesn't matter, though. I'm almost home. I went ahead and did the responsible, the smart thing and walked instead of driving. Besides, the night breeze feels good tonight. The sensation of it blowing across my skin is... Oh, the full moon broke through the clouds. Great. Now I'm a fucking werewolf. Usually the process hurts like a bitch. I barely feel anything this time. I trip over the edge of the sidewalk and fall snout first into the concrete. Still no pain. Okay. Maybe I should have stopped drinking after that 5th Jell-O shot. Maybe. If I had stopped, I wouldn't have got that stripper's phone number, and... Shit, I left her phone number back at the bar. And I can't remember the name of the bar. The bar that my car is parked at. I push myself back up off the sidewalk and continue on my way. Those sound like tomorrow problems to me. Tonight, I'm all about getting home, microwaving some burritos, and laying on the couch watching Ron Popeil set it and forget it. A lot of you probably aren't going to get that last part. See, there's this guy named Ron Popeil, and he has these late-night infomercials where he's selling these chicken ovens, and... never mind. It's like watching YouTube videos, except that all the videos are designed to separate you from your money. So, basically, it's exactly like YouTube videos. I reach my house and open the short gate door so that I can walk up the front path. I stop for a moment and frown. I don't remember having a gate. Or a fence, for that matter. I shrug. It's probably just one of those magically appearing fences that you hear about from time to time. I stumble up the short path to the porch steps, stop a few feet away and peer at them closely with my wolf eyes. This is going to be tricky. My sight is a little blurry, but I'm pretty sure that each step is about, 11 bajillion inches tall. Oh well, fortune favors the bald, or something like that. I take a deep breath and raise up one leg. To my surprise, my still-shoed paw makes contact with the top of the step. I must have forgotten that my legs are 11 bajillion inches long or something. I carefully navigate the other 2 giant steps and make it onto the porch itself. The air is a lot thinner way up here. My stomach starts to churn, and I stumble towards the front door. Not a problem. I'll just go inside, get into the bathroom, and, well, fuck that plan, because now I'm throwing up all over the front door. Not a little bit either. This just kind of keeps going. Well, hold on there. I think... Nope. More vomit. Give me a minute here. Okay, finally. I'm done. Wait. Okay. I think that's all of it. Damn it. Where's all this coming from? It's like I went drinking and then decided to ingest the entire contents of the Mississippi River. And let me tell you, you do not want to be throwing up as a werewolf. All of your senses are heightened, including taste and smell. This porch has the same stench as a bouncy castle after a dozen preschool students went inside of it immediately after gorging themselves on cake and ice cream. Oh, thank Jeebus. That's the end of it. And I am not touching that door or its handle. It's okay, though. I've got a backup. I always leave one of the back windows unlocked just for this kind of occasion. I leave the porch, being careful not to plummet to my death down the massive stairs, and going slowly enough that the change in air pressure won't give me the bends. I'm suddenly very glad that I paid attention during diving school. Or that might have been Shark Week. Fuck, I don't know. I'm a drunk werewolf trying to get inside to make burritos. What do you want from me? Too much. That's what you want from me. I stumble around the side of the house. You're always wanting too much from me. I give and I give and I give, and still you want more. Well, you know what? That's it. I can't take this one-sided relationship anymore. I'm going to go inside and pack my bags, and I'm going to go stay with my mother. Don't try calling, because I won't answer. Wait, no, I'm so sorry, baby. You know how I can get when I've had a few to drink. Can we just sit down and talk about this? Are you even real? Who the hell am I talking to? What was I doing again? Oh, right, the window. So I can make burritos. I go around to the back of the house and make my way to the second window from the left. It takes me a minute to figure out which of the 10 windows I'm seeing is the real one, and not the clones that are spinning all around it. The window is locked. I would swear that I left it unlocked when I left for the bar... I want to say earlier in the day, but it might have been late last week. That happens sometimes. I'll step out for a quick nip and find myself arriving back home days later, wearing someone else's clothing and finding multiple citations for public indecency shoved into my pocket. Analyzing my missing time isn't going to get me inside of my house, though. I try to lift the window again, but the lack of moving confirms that it is indeed locked. Maybe I left the porch door unlocked. I look over at it and sigh. It's about 15 feet away from where I'm standing. That's, like, so far away. Ah, fuck it. Now is the time for action, not for thinking. I leap through the window, shattering the glass and sending thousands of wood splinters flying in every direction. On the other side is the sink and kitchen counter, and I crash into both. No problem. I'm a werewolf. Wolf is kind of a dog, and everyone knows that dogs always land on their feet, right? My foot catches in the sink, and I fall face first into the tile flooring. As I do so, my shoe rips apart, and my paw pops out just in time to become stuck in the drain. I manage to get it unwedged and stand up. As I brush myself off, I begin to wonder why the kitchen is now here. I'm no expert on architecture, but I'm pretty sure that when a kitchen starts on the north end of a house, it tends to stay on that end instead of migrating to the south side. I'm sure it's nothing. Once again, not an expert on architecture or its migratory habits. Something else isn't quite right. I look around the room for a few moments, trying to figure out what exactly is out of place. It's probably something small, something nearly imperceptible. Werewolves are far more in tune with their environments than normal folks, so we're able to detect even the most minuscule of oddities. It takes a bit, but I finally work out what's off about my surroundings. I was right. It is small, nearly unrecognizable. There's a woman standing next to the open refrigerator, staring at me with her mouth open wide as she holds a pitcher of milk in one hand. My eyes go wide. It's a home invader. This woman has broken into my house, my sanctuary, and is now attempting to drink my milk. My milk that I don't remember buying, but I clearly must have. She's also wearing my pink form-fitting bathrobe. Wait, no, that doesn't make sense. I don't own a pink form-fitting bathrobe. Or those slippers that she's wearing either. I take a quick look around the kitchen as my head swims pleasantly from the alcohol. A gate that I didn't remember. A locked window when I was sure that I had unlocked it. A kitchen on the wrong side of the house. There was only one rational explanation here. This woman had broken into my house, put up a fence to block the view of my neighbors, and proceeded to rearrange the inside of the building to her preferences. She wasn't a home invader. She was a squatter. Well, I'll be damned if I'm going to let anyone claim squatters' rights in my house. I stand straight up and gnash my teeth as I let out a low growl from deep in my throat. If there's one thing that I know about being a werewolf, it's how to look intimidating. Holy shit, she gasps, dropping the pitcher containing the milk. The pitcher strikes the tile floor, and I brace myself for it to shatter and send glass flying in every direction. Instead, it bounces once and slides into the side of the counter. Plastic pitcher. Nice. Nice, doggy, the woman says nervously, her hand stretched out towards me as she backs away. Good doggy. I squint. Doggy? I know that I'm not exactly 100%, but come on, I can't possibly look more like a dog than a werewolf currently. After all, I am a werewolf. How can I look more like something else when I'm already this specific something? Did that make sense? I feel like that didn't make sense. Who's a good boy? The woman asks shakily. Okay, now this is just getting offensive. How dare she come into my house and treat me like a lowly pet? On the other hand, though, I'm the good boy. Me. I'm a good boy. Are you a good boy? She asks as she nears the doorway leading out of the kitchen. Who's the good boy? Is it you? My tail begins to wag. Me. Look at me. Look at me being a good boy. With one last long look at me, the woman flees out of the doorway and disappears around the corner. My tail wags slower and slower until it comes to a stop. Did she leave before she truly understood that I'm a good boy? Wait, what the fuck am I thinking? That woman is a goddamn squatter. Who cares if she thinks I'm a good boy? Okay, full disclosure, I do kind of care if she thinks I'm a good boy. That's not going to stop me from tearing her apart, though. I'm a good boy with fucking principles. First things first, though. I take a moment to tear off the remainder of my clothing. Let's see someone mistake me for a dog now that I'm completely nude. Before I pursue the squatter, I go to the still open refrigerator and look inside. I'm suddenly very thirsty. There's a 6-pack of beer sitting on the lower shelf. I take a few minutes to drain each of the 6 bottles, using one claw to pop off the caps. Still just a bit parched. There's a few cans of wine spritzer left in the refrigerator. Not usually my thing, but beggars can't be choosers. I know for a fact that I didn't buy any of this bubbly carbonated shit. I can't believe that a squatter would bring this awful stuff into my home. I gently pop the tab on the first can and take a sip. Huh, that's not bad. There's kind of a hint of raspberry, and I'm not normally a raspberry guy, but that's not bad. I finish the can and pick up the next one. Instead of opening it normally, however, I pierce the bottom of it and shotgun the contents. I do the same to all the others and let out a massive belch. There we go. The old buzz was starting to fade for a few minutes there. That got things back on track. Everything is nice and fuzzy and all smushy again, just like the Lord intended. I stumble back and forth a bit as I walk over to the doorway. Either the alcohol is doing its thing, or the entire floor is rocking like the deck of a sailing ship. Smart money is probably on the alcohol. The door leads into the dining room. I take a couple of steps into it before I notice an odd sensation. There's an intense itching coming from my lower backside. I reach back to scratch it, but it's at an odd angle, and I have to be careful not to puncture my own body with my claws. Damn it, I thought that I got rid of the worms. That's the part of being a werewolf that nobody really thinks about. You're basically a big wolf that can stand on 2 feet, which comes with all the positives and the negatives. One of those negatives is the possibility of getting worms. They go away when I turn back into a person, but inevitably they pop back up when I wolf out again. There's no dignified way to do this. I creep over to the far side of the dining room and peer out through the archway leading into the entryway. There's no one there, and when I look up at the nearby staircase, I don't see anyone there either. Satisfied that I'm alone, at least for the moment, I sit down on the carpeted floor and carefully pull myself forward with my hands. The process scoots my ass across the floor, and the carpet manages to scratch the itch that I am otherwise unable to reach. As I stand up, I realize that I'm probably going to need to burn this carpet once I've gotten the squatter out. Werewolf ass rubbing streaks aren't the kind of thing that come out with a little soap and water. With the itching now alleviated, I go out into the entryway and listen. There's no sound coming from the first floor, but I'm definitely hearing something happening up on the second. I look up the stairs. I'm not really feeling operating stairs right now. Not much choice, though. Time to both man up and wolf up. I have to stop at the halfway point to catch my breath. The combination of the alcohol and the countless pounds of pork rinds makes it difficult to go in anything resembling a vertical direction. I really need to get myself into better shape. Oh joy, and here comes another vomit geyser. That's it. The good clean living starts tomorrow. After breakfast, obviously. The only good thing for the hangover I'm going to have is a giant juicy burger with a fried egg and bacon on it. That's going to make me thirsty, and the best thing to wash it down with will be a cold frosty beer. Oh, and football will be on Saturday and Sunday, so there's no point in starting one of those days. Well, whatever. I'll get around to that clean living thing at some point. You know, once it fits into my schedule better. I barely have time to put one foot down on the second floor when the door at the far end of the hallway bursts open. I blink a few times to make sure that I'm actually seeing what I'm looking at, instead of having the latest in a long line of alcohol-induced hallucinations. Standing in the doorway are 2 figures. Based on the robe, one of them is the woman I encountered downstairs, but now covering her face is a bloody pig's head. Her companion, a larger male figure, is wearing a clown's face. It's not a mask made to look like a clown, and it's not simply face paint. He's wearing an actual clown's face that has apparently been removed from a jester's skull. I can smell the rotting flesh odor coming off of both of them from here. Just behind them is a bedroom glowing with candlelight. Even with my limited view, I can make out at least 3 bodies hanging from the ceiling, parts torn off of them, and their blood covering every surface I can see. Okay, so 2 things are quickly becoming clear. This isn't my house, and I've stepped into something way more twisted than a home invasion. Both of the figures are holding knives longer than their arms. I put up my hands/paws in what I hope appears as a non-threatening manner and slowly back down the stairs. I'm not one to judge anyone's murder kinks. I'm a werewolf after all. I've used many people as chew toys over the years. That doesn't mean that I want to become a part of whatever this is. Pighead and Jester advance towards the stairs at the same pace that I'm moving down them. I'm not sure when I named them. Must have been right now. My grandmother always told me that I had the soul of a poet. I reach the bottom of the stairs and extend one arm out behind me. After fumbling around for a few seconds, my clawed hand finds the doorknob and tries to turn it. The door is locked. Of course it is. I manage to locate the bolt and slide it open. The entire time the two killers continue down towards me, the knives held out in front of them. I try the doorknob again, and this time it turns. I practically fling the door open before turning and running as quickly as I can out onto the front yard. As I reach the gate, I leap over it and land a dozen feet on the other side. I look over my shoulder as I dash down the street. The killers don't seem to be following me. I put a few blocks between me and the house just to make sure. When I finally stop, there's yet another fit of vomiting. I typically don't throw up this much after drinking. To be fair, I also don't typically mistake my house for a different one that has a murder party going on inside. So, there's that. Just as I manage to catch my breath, the full moon disappears behind a group of thick clouds. My transformation is reversed, and I quickly return to my human form. I'm tired, I'm feeling sick, and I'm completely naked in the middle of a suburban neighborhood. I can also really use a drink.
As soon as that first body turned up, they already had me pegged for it. It wouldn't be the first time they blamed me for something like this, and I just knew it wouldn't be the last. I'd never bothered any of them, but ever since I came back from Afghanistan, and that damn sheriff had sat it out for me. I had just about gotten my uncle's old camper up and running to finally get my ass away from this shallow little town and its shitty little residents, when this madness dropped on my lap. My name's Bauer, and I served 3 tours out there before I was finally sent back home. The nightmares of seeing what became of the folks I was close to still keeps me awake far too many nights. It took a toll on me, made it so I wasn't fit to be a soldier anymore, not in the way they wanted me to be anyway. Yeah, we got into the gritty shit, me and my company, but I was the only one to make it out of there in one piece. That damn place left most of us dead, but me and Banks survived it. Though he was half the man he used to be by the time I came back home. I still see his legs turning a hamburger right in front of me when I close my eyes. I was in so much shock at the time it took me longer than I'd like to admit before I realized he was still alive. Wasn't much left of him below the waist anymore, but he made it back to the States with me. I hoped we could still be a part of each other's lives when we returned, but that wasn't in the cards. He put a gun in his mouth about 2 months after we got home. I tried to stick by his side, but he pushed me away, as well as anyone else who tried to help. I still feel the guilt of not being able to truly help him, as well as the burden of seeing someone I cared about losing everything he was to that war. Banks was a good friend to me back then. We talked about, opening a bar or something when we made it back home, but that never came to fruition. Truth be told, he may as well have died when that bomb took his legs. I think it took what was left of his mind just as much as his ability to ever walk again. I think I lost almost as much of my marbles as he did when it happened. It was the last straw that was holding my already fractured brain intact. Every time I got close to thinking I got my demons beat, something refuels them, feeds them, makes them even stronger than before. Yeah, I've seen some shit, but nothing could have prepared me for this. I was born in Pennsylvania, but my folks died some years back, so I didn't have much reason to go back there when I came home. Uncle Frank, he lived out here in Vermont, so that's where I ended up. He was hanging on by a thread by the time I got back, but we'd always been pretty close since I was a kid. He helped me through the toughest parts of readjusting to life amongst the living, but I had to watch the cancer eat away at him piece by piece until there was nothing left. He was a vet too, and he still had plenty of both mental and physical scars from his time in Vietnam, so he sort of lived off the grid himself. His camper was all he had to leave me, but he never had kids of his own. I suppose that's why he was a second father to me, also what inspired me to join the military in the first place. Yeah, he tried to talk me out of it, given how the war messed him up, but I idolized the man when I was a child. I sometimes wish I'd listened to him, though. He was the one that taught me how to hunt, fish, use a knife, and shoot a gun, long before Uncle Sam showed me the ropes. Hell, I probably learned more about how to kill from Frank than anyone else, and it was probably the only damn thing I was ever good at. Told me I was a natural, my uncle, and I suppose he was right. Can't say how he ended up living on the outskirts of this little town, though. They looked at him like a stain on their otherwise perfect little paradise, and I guess I carried the torch after he passed. The old RV hadn't run in years, but we'd work on the old girl when we had the money for parts and such. Felt the engine rumble for the first time in God knows how long, only a week or so before he lost the fight. She still wasn't exactly seaworthy and all, but I still planned to move on as soon as I got everything working right. Yeah, I sorta lost the motivation for a bit after he died, but I got back to work on her just before all this shit started. There was a couple that went missing at first. They had supposedly been just passing through, so nobody really stressed it too much. Sure, the abandoned car they left by the tree line near the city limits raised some eyebrows, but this little slice of America never did care too much for outsiders, so they didn't exactly put a lot of effort into investigating it. And they towed the car, searched around in the woods for a couple of hours, but that was about it. As long as it didn't concern them or their own, it didn't much matter to them. Sure enough, good old Sheriff Garfield came knocking on my door when they were looking into it, though. He was creeping on about 50 and looked like he was probably in pretty solid shape when he was younger. He was a little over 6 feet tall, a good couple of inches taller than me, but he was pretty thick around the waistline, kept his head cleanly shaved aside from that thick caterpillar mustache. He always stood as tall as he could to look down on me, but that shit never fazed me. Yeah, anytime anything irregular happened, the old camper nestled up on the hill was his first stop. He didn't push it too far, though, not until one of their own came up missing. That day, he had me in shackles before I could even get a word in. Him and his little goon squad he called the neighborhood watch. They already had their mind made up that I was the one who did something to the group of teens who went partying out in the woods that weekend. Yeah, they beat on me a bit while I was in chains, called me baby killer and the like, but nothing I wasn't used to from folks like these. I've been tortured by far more experienced hands than some good old boys who hadn't even been in anything worse than a brawl or two. I took their hits and I still told the same story I'd been trying to the whole time. I don't mess with anyone in this damn town, not unless I have to stop by the post office to pick up my check from Uncle Sam, or grab some odds and ends at the local stores. I didn't even know the kids who never made it home that night, let alone what could have happened to them. They still kept me locked up for a week or so, but after another disappearance left some body parts behind, yeah, they couldn't pin that one on me. Of course, Garfield didn't so much as attempt to apologize when they let me walk, but I wouldn't have expected any less from that rat bastard. He did have the nerve to ask if I'd be interested in joining the posse to hunt down what they assumed to be a bear or something, but I just walked away without a word. I didn't hear many details about what was left of whoever the limbs and guts blood belonged to, but they seemed pretty certain it wasn't something any man could have done. Yeah, I know what men are capable of. Seen some of the worst of it firsthand. Hell, I've done some of the worst of it myself, but there ain't much someone in the wrong state of mind can pull off if they have the time and means to do it. That was my thinking anyway, though I wasn't about to argue about being set free. Whether or not I gave two shits about the people of this city, I planned to do my own looking into who or whatever was doing this. Sorta wish I'd just stayed out of it, to be completely honest. Just got the old camper roadworthy and turned my back on this little shithole. And of course, there's a lot of things I would have done differently in my life if I knew then what I know now. And what's another few scars on the body and mind when all said and done, though? Ain't no point looking back. Not anymore. The posse consisted of maybe 20 or so guys, all of them big old shit-kicking jokers. A couple of them were the ones beating on me for the sheriff's delight, so I knew they had no chance against someone that tore some folks to pieces. Just because they're big, it don't mean they can fight. I've had worse beatings in a friendly sparring match or two. Hell, Uncle Frank hit harder when he was all skin and bones from the cancer. Whoever or whatever was out there, yeah, I knew they couldn't handle it. I tracked them from a good distance, kept the higher ground so I could see where they were headed. It didn't take me long to catch up with them either.
I likely should have headed back to the camper to load up on some supplies, but Garfield reluctantly gave me back my K-bar when he let me go. I always kept it on me, even if I was just sitting around the fire pit like I was when they dragged me to the station. That knife was like a fifth limb to me all these years, and I can control it just as well as any of them, maybe even better. If we were hunting a man, it wouldn't take much to drop him, just a flick of the wrist, nothing to it. Night was falling when things took a turn, when I got the first sight of what was really going on here. Being that it was dark out, all I had to go on was the beams of their flashlights down below. I'd spent a good deal of time in the woods over the 8 months or so I'd been living out this way, but I still had to watch my step. Last thing I needed was to tumble down on top of those I was tracking. When one of them screamed out, I watched those lights dart all over the place, when the panic got the better of them. Whatever was going on down there, I needed to get a closer look. While I was working my way down the hill, I heard more screams and what sounded like growling of some kind. I thought it could be that they were right after all. Maybe it was a bear that brought them out this way, but I hadn't ever heard of a grizzly bear killing folks and dragging them so deep that nobody could find them. Whatever it was, it had the poorly trained posse spooked, and when one of them that was screaming turned to moist gargles, I knew the others wouldn't last much longer. Several of them were shouting and whining in one way or another, basically announcing their position to whatever was after them. I didn't have time to roll my eyes at their stupidity, but I was closing the gap. When I came up on the body spitting blood across the grass, I could damn sure see that no man could have done something like this after all, not in such a short amount of time. His whole throat had been ripped apart, left arm torn away, and his gut was shredded to ribbons. Yeah, it could all be done by human hands and the right tools, but not this quickly. His flashlight was some feet away, with the hand that had been holding it still gripped on. Yeah, I reckon this thing was a lefty. The closer I looked, with light shining across the lifeless husk, the damage to his midsection looked to have been caused by one swift strike. Everything had been pulled to the right, and what had been spilled out and was wrapped around the tree, just a few feet in that direction. That was the first strike, if I were to guess. That or the arm. The throat came after, since that scream that turned to gargles came a few minutes later. That poor bastard didn't have a chance. When I was attempting to unwrap the rifle from his shoulder, that's when a couple of his buddies cleared the trees. And when they saw me kneeling next to the guy trying to claim his gun, they trained theirs on me, while barking more of their damn threats and bullshit. "I fucking knew it," Garfield said when he came up on the ones that had me at gunpoint. "It ain't like this, boys," I said, dropping the gun strap and raising my hands. "I found him like this. I was just..." "Shut the fuck up, you sick son of a bitch," he said, pulling the pistol from his holster, walking closer to where I knelt. "I'm gonna do what I should have done in the first place." I knew what he was planning. I could see it in his eyes, that same look I'd seen on so many faces. I was all too familiar with the expression someone gets when they got killing in mind. He was walking slowly, almost reluctantly, but I had a feeling he wanted to do it right. I can't say if he'd ever killed anyone before, but the way his hands were shaking could have been anything from excited apprehension to just the shock of seeing what was left of his friend. He wanted to get close. He wanted to make sure he hit his mark, especially with the way his gun was tremoring. Yeah, he'd have to get right up on me to be sure, press the barrel right to my head. It's the only way he could be certain. He didn't take into account the advantage that it'd give me. Didn't think it through or plan it out right. Yeah, his type doesn't think too highly about a soldier, and that was his greatest weakness. You don't disrespect your enemy, not if you want to get the drop on them. As soon as he pushed the barrel in my face, even though I could see that finger twitch and prepare to pull back, I was faster than him. I swatted that hand as soon as it was in range, spun him around to face his posse with my other arm, and pressed my blade against his throat, just daring his boys to open fire. "Look at my knife," I said, letting their lights hit metal. "It's clean. No blood, no guts or meat." Garfield was shaking like a leaf in a storm, but he was fighting hard not to so much as twitch. In his weak little mind, all he saw was that I was a killer, and he suddenly didn't want to give me a reason. "Does this look like a blade that could have done that?" I nodded at the ripped-up body on the ground, hoping their little brains could wrap around these facts. Each one of them still held their guns on me while they whispered back and forth like they were little kids telling secrets or something. I just kept praying they'd see the truth of what I was saying. And hard to figure out that not only had my knife not been used recently, but one little pig sticker couldn't have done that much damage. Not in so little time. Just let him go and we'll talk it out, man. The one with the shaggy hair and finely trimmed beard said, still waving his rifle around like he was trying to swat a fly. Yeah, if I drop him, you're gonna drop me. You think I'm that stupid? I knew what they were thinking. Get the chief out of the way and fill my guts full of lead. I ain't always the sharpest tool in the shed, but I ain't as dumb as a box of rocks either. Just let him. What I would assume to be whatever made that growling sound before howled out in some sort of almost guttural wail. I never heard anything like it my whole life, but luckily for me, the ones that held their guns on me looked like they hadn't either. They turned their heads in all directions trying to find the source of the noise, and I wasted no time pushing Garfield to the ground before hauling ass away from them. As soon as the chief hit the grass, he yelled at the boys to fire, and I heard a barrage of bullets landing in the trees and dirt behind me, but I didn't let up until I was out of range. I heard them try to scamper after me, but the darkness, combined with them wasting time firing at nothing before they took to running, they weren't going to find me, not unless I wanted them to. "Power!" the sheriff yelled out from somewhere behind me. "You're in a world of shit when we find you." He wasn't wrong, of course, but whatever tore this man to shreds found me first. The local law would be the least of my trouble. On the flip side, if it got to them before me, they'd learn a thing or two about hunters and prey. What I had to decide at this point is, should I let it? That close-minded prick had made life hard for me and Frank for some time, but could I really just leave him and his boys to get ripped apart? I had never been much of a God-fearing man. My parents were regulars at church every Sunday since I was a kid, but they never forced me to walk the path they chose. Still, I put my life and sanity on the line to protect folks I'd never laid eyes on, leaving me with scars that'll never heal. No, this one wasn't my problem, not after everything the small-minded sheriff in his worthless little town had put me through. At that point, my only concern was getting as far away from my pursuers as I could. Whatever may or may not happen to them after I was gone wasn't my problem. Maybe if I could get back to the old camper, maybe I had enough life in it to get across the borders of the city, free me from this damn place and its shitty residents. That was my thinking at the time, before the screaming started again. It could have been no more than instinct that made me stop running as soon as another horrified screech echoed across in between the trees. Perhaps it was my own fear of what was out there that made my pulse race while I stood in place, still almost gasping for breath from the flat-out sprint. Of course, it's very possible that I am a singularly stupid individual, one that allows some bizarre sense of morality to overrule my better judgment and send me charging back to those from whom I had only just escaped. Gunfire was erupting from all over the place ahead of me, while one gargled voice became silent before another yelled out in shock and fear. My heart pounded against the wall of my chest as I drew closer, even more so when I could make out the growls again. They were hauntingly deep, vibrating in guttural moans that sounded as though each one reverberated against the inner lining of my ears in ways I couldn't describe. I felt them as much as I heard them. The first body I came across had been torn in two, split apart in the midsection, only connected by gnarled and meaty strips of tissue. The expression frozen to the man's place was one of complete and absolute horrified shock. The look in his vacant eyes almost disturbed me more than the jagged remains of his spinal column, protruding through where his intestines were sprawled out across the dead leaves. With the others sounding as though they were only some yards ahead, I reached for the gun lying on the ground next to the empty husk, only to find he had apparently spent what ammunition he had. Even with all the awful shit I'd seen in my life, I still fought against retching across the bloodied pool of guts in my feet as I searched the body for any extra ammo. Can't say I wasn't surprised to find no trace of any, as these men were clearly not remotely prepared for this. As I raised up once more from the ground, a grisly howl called out from what felt like all around me, causing my stomach to churn even more than it already was. Being the incredibly stupid man I am, I charged onwards with my K-bar gripped tightly. If a full load of ammunition didn't so much as slow this thing down, I wasn't entirely sure what a finely honed 7-inch blade would do to it, but I had always been more skilled with a knife than a firearm. Yeah, it was a good shot, and rarely missed my mark, but I was always better up close and personal. Since the bizarre soundtrack of whatever this beast was sounded as though it came from all directions, I had little choice than to follow the sounds of the screams. It didn't exactly take rocket science to figure out that whatever the current victim was would lead me directly to what was killing them. After ducking under low-hanging branches while weaving between trees, some of which had deep gashes clawed into them, I finally came face to face with what I had been seeking. What I saw almost caused my knife to slip from my fingers before running back the other way. I was so shocked by the sight I couldn't even convince my legs to move. It stood twice the height of the guy with the neatly trimmed beard who had held outstretched in a dark fur-lined arm. It looked like every inch of the beast was layered in that thick black hair, though I could still make out the bulging and rippled muscles of its arms. It had the shape and proportions of a large man, but its head and lower half resembled some sort of enormous dog or wolf. Everything looked animalistic, with the exception of the human-like torso and arms, as well as the fact that it stood upright on 2 legs. There was the other aspect of the beast that had my knees shaking so violently I thought I may snap a femur in two. Given the fact I could only see the profile of the mammoth from where I stood, I could only make out one of its eyes, above and back from its snarling, sharp-toothed muzzle, but it glowed a vibrant red, as though I were gazing into the eyes of the devil himself. The crimson beam illuminated its wrinkled snout, accentuating the feral and hungered expression. I still gazed on, practically rooted to the spot while it wrapped one large 5-fingered hand around the head of its victim, before placing the other around its neck and upon its shoulders. The guy tried to let out a scream again, but all I could make out was a muffled whimper when the enlarged palm spread across his mouth. I could still see the blood spew from between the fingers of the beast while it pulled up on the head that it held, while pressing down on the torso. I heard every tear and snap of the muscle fibers and flesh of the man's neck as it stretched and split. The muffled gargles combined with the sound of blood splattering against the trees while spraying onto the gaping mouth of the creature. As the final slivers of skin and tissue gave way, the bone creaked and snapped, putting an end to any other sounds besides that of the blood still leaking from within the 2 parts which were once a whole person. Once again that thing howled out that maddening wailing chorus, throwing its neck back while reaching its arms out to its sides, dropping the pieces of its victim to the forest floor. I could feel my legs giving out as the life felt as though it was draining from in me. My body twitched in spasm as my mind fought to rationalize what my eyes were gazing upon, but it was a losing battle. I was certain I was only seconds away from being ripped apart myself, and I could barely command my limbs to take action. That was until I felt a hand grip around my ankle. I almost leaped out of my skin as images of a sanctum of those creatures flew across my mind's eye. But when I looked down to see one of the big guys from the sheriff's goon squad staring up at me, it took me a minute to notice what sort of shape he was in. Both of his legs were gone, which instantly flashed my mind back to Banks' limbs turning to hamburger. I managed to snap out of both my paralysis from seeing that beast tear that poor bastard's head off, as well as my own fucked up memories. I gave one final glance to the howling behemoth before I dropped to the ground next to the man who was barely clinging onto his life, with what was left of his body shuddering so badly I just knew the beast would hear us. I peered through the bushes to see that thing turn to face where we both shivered across the blood-soaked leaves, attempting to be as silent as humanly possible. I tried to hold the guy next to me as still as possible while I prayed to the gods I had never put my faith in before. I could feel my own senses begin to recover when I convinced my muscles to stop spasming, allowing me to regain my tight grip on the hilt of my knife, preparing to strike if the beast came close. It looked to be sniffing at the air as its snout wrinkled and puffed, but I could only hope that the scent of the carnage it had spread across the woods would be enough to disguise my own sweat and filth. While it darted its enormous head from one side to the other before strolling back in the other direction, I finally let out a slow and trembling breath, unaware I'd even been holding it in. The broken man and I stayed in that same spot, not so much as uttering a single word to one another for what felt like hours. While we waited, I pulled off my belt to wrap around the meaty stumps from where his legs used to be. Unfortunately, as I tightened it down to halt the flowing stream of blood, I noticed the guy's eyes were vacant and wide. I felt for the poor prick, even if he had pegged me for those brutal killings as much as Garfield, but nobody deserves an end like this. Even with the dead man right next to where I crouched, I still gave it another 10 minutes or so before I got moving again. Not only did I want to be sure that the thing had moved on, but I wasn't sure how many of Garfield's boys were still kicking. Unfortunately, that was a question that was answered only moments after I got back on my way.
"There he is!"
The sheriff's voice screamed out, accompanied by the hoots and hollers of several others. I turned to see multiple flashlights beaming as the clumsy footsteps of the posse came crashing through the trees right at me.
"Look what he did!" That sick son of a bitch. Shoot him on sight.
Were all about I could make out while one guy's words blended into another's before gunfire silenced all of them. I tried to scream out that I wasn't responsible for any of this, but if they thought me capable of separating limbs and heads with no more than my damn knife, there's no way my words were going to convince them of shit. I could only assume that the group had split apart while they were chasing me down, but I couldn't figure out how they couldn't see that whatever was making those feral and guttural noises was the one responsible for all the carnage. I just continued to run, hoping that these half-assed trained junior mercenaries wouldn't be able to land a hit on me. I didn't know if I was running away from them or towards a monster, but at the time, the bastards trying to gun me down were the most immediate threat. Still, I was trapped on that damn mountain with a giant hairy beast and an angry fucking mob, both of which would likely be thrilled to see me dead. Maybe if I'd been focusing on the road ahead rather than all of the madness, I would have noticed the ledge before I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. When I felt my body practically slap across the water, I just knew I'd hit the ground, and this was the end for me. It took me a minute to realize I was sucking in water rather than floating away to Neverland or some shit. I wrestled my way back to the surface just in time to hear more gunfires from above, likely from the ledge I dropped from. To my continued surprise, I was apparently out of range enough for none of them to hit me before I made it to the riverbank. As soon as I was certain I was out of the mob's sight, I dropped to the ground, gasping for breath. I was hurting and exhausted. I was almost literally between a rock and a hard place, but at least I had a moment finally. I took a chance and allowed my body to rest before moving on, as I was sure it'd take them some time to get down to where I found myself. Still, even if I had managed to somehow survive the carnage the beast shed, as well as the ignorant pricks who couldn't tell the difference between an animal attack and what is realistically possible with a damn K-bar, it was quite clear to me that my long and brutal night had only just begun. By the time the damn goon squad made it to the riverbank, I was long gone. Though they didn't realize it, I could still see them, but they had no clue where I had headed. Of course, it wasn't exactly hard to make out where they were with the beams of their flashlights darting all over the damn place. They were yelling back and forth to each other so loudly I just knew they would draw the attention of that creature soon enough. On one hand, I really didn't see a problem with that, as it would take them out of the equation and I could hopefully get off this mountain while they were getting chewed on like an old pair of slippers. Unfortunately, I still wasn't sure if I could live with that on my already heavy conscience. I'd seen far too many good people die for no good reason, and even though these ignorant bastards would not fit into that category for me, I didn't know if I could just let them be torn apart. Besides, if they did all get wiped out by that thing, I was certain I would still be held responsible. With my luck, Garfield would still make it out unscathed, and he'd still pin it all on me, even if he did see that thing up close and personal. For the time being, I kept an eye on those hunting me, even if I hadn't decided yet what I would do if it came down to a them or me situation. As it turned out, that wouldn't be a debate I would have to dwell on for long. I'm not sure if it was the howling or the screaming I heard first. I'd been keeping an eye on the lights cutting through the darkness, but I couldn't make out much else from where I stalked above. I think it was pure instinct that sent me charging down that hill just as I had before. Yeah, I still had nothing to defend myself more than my K-bar, but I still knew I had to at least make an effort to clear some of the members of the sheriff's posse from the path of that thing. The closer I got to the sounds of now multiple yelling voices and discharging firearms, the more my own muscles began to twitch and shudder. As soon as I cleared the trees to see Garfield along with another 4 of his men, they instantly turned their guns on me, causing my feet to skid to a halt. "Your men are dying out here, Chief. We ain't got time for this shit," I said, hoping to rationalize with the man who had never shown the ability to be rational. The high-pitched shrieks and gunfire sounded to me only 40 or 50 yards away at most, but the boys wouldn't turn their guns away from me. "You got a partner out there?" Garfield asked. When another gnarled howl erupted from somewhere to their backs, each of them turned their heads with alarmed expressions etched across their faces. I almost took the opportunity to snatch at least one of their weapons while they were distracted, but I knew I had to keep things as peaceful as I could if I hoped to get through to them. Not only that, but I didn't need any of them getting trigger-happy and giving away our position. "That sound like a man to you?" I asked. "What's out there, man?" the tall and slender guy in the back of the group asked, still cutting his head to each side. "Come on, Chief, you gotta see what's going on here. If we work together, maybe we can survive this." "You think I'm stupid, Bauer? You just want me to let my guard down, right? Do you really?" "Damn it, Garfield. Yes, I think you're being dumb as shit right now. You hear that?" I asked, pointing my finger in the direction of where the gargled screams were coming from. Your men are dying out there, you ignorant bastard. He looked dumbfounded, but still walked closer to me, pressing the barrel of his rifle against my chest. Pull that trigger, or get the fuck out of my way, I said, staring the close-minded prick down. If he wasn't prepared to do anything to help save his man, it would be up to me to try. I knew I couldn't persuade any of these idiots to give me a gun, but if I could at least get close to the beast, I'd gut the son of a bitch, even if it tore me apart while I did. Another scream, even closer to where I faced off with those who were still convinced that I was the killer, finally caused the chief to lose his focus for long enough for me to pull the gun from his shaking hands. The others trained their weapons on me again while Garfield backed away, holding his hands up. I still just held his rifle by the barrel before I tossed it back at him. I ain't the bad guy here. He just stared me down again after fumbling the gun between his hands before finally securing his grip. He began to raise it up to aim at me again, but the expression on his face had changed. What do you want us to do, Chief? Just shoot the bastard. We gotta get the hell out of here, man. Let's just go. The words of the crumbling group of undertrained mercenaries overlapped one another, while the sheriff continued to study me, occasionally turning his head to allow his ears to meet the squeals of those who were surely being ripped to pieces. Okay, he said, drawing the pistol from his hip and tossing it to me. You make a move on any of us, and I'll drop your sorry ass. You'd better fucking believe. His threats were cut short by a bloodied body being launched through the trees, splitting the bark of one of them, before landing almost right at his feet. Jesus Christ! One of the guys yelled out, retching instantly from the side of the man who had been split open from groin to throat. Two of the other guys were just whimpering in barely audible tones, while the sheriff just gazed slack-jawed at what remained of one of his boys. We barely had the opportunity to take in what had happened when the beast itself burst through the trees, splintering shards of wood around the still twitching corpse. Garfield just stared up at the thing as it heaved with deep breath, while glaring down at him with those glowing eyes still shining across its wrinkled snout. The whole scene played out before me, making a matter of seconds feel like it lasted an eternity. One of the guys who hadn't completely lost his shit fired at the thing, before the creature just swatted at him with the back of his enlarged five-fingered hand. The man slammed his back against the thick bark behind him, and I heard what could have been anything from the snapping of wood to the shattering of his bones. As he slid down to the ground, either unconscious or dead, the chief raised his own trembling gun up to the momentarily distracted monster. He shot once, directly into the heaving chest of the thing. It whipped its head back to face the chief before wrapping its fur-lined hand around both the gun and the arm which tried to stabilize it. Even with the others having regained some of their composure, now firing their own bullets into the black matted fur, it still appeared to move so slowly as it squeezed the chief's arm before jerking it from one side to the other. Garfield shrieked out in an anguished and shocked squeal as the beast tore the arm away from his body, leaving nothing more than twisted tissue and bloodied meat about halfway down the length of his bicep. His screaming did not stop, even when he fell to the ground, gazing up at the thing as it tossed the pummeled and shredded limb to the ground. Still ignoring those who unloaded their guns into its back, the monster reached down to the chief, outstretching its widened hand to clutch the whimpering man by the head. Finally convincing my own trembling limbs to take action, I leapt forwards, jabbing my blade through the center of the splayed open hand, pulling back to carve a ditch from the center of its palm to where the knuckles ended between the fingers. It swiftly pulled back, falling back to the ground itself, gazing madly at the grizzled split running almost the length of its furry paw. It made a high-pitched, shrill squeal that threatened to cause me to spill my guts across the sheriff, who still writhed on the grass, reeling from the gruesome amputation. While the creature still appeared shocked by its own injury, I dragged the chief back by his own collar, while attempting to form a makeshift tourniquet to halt the flow of his gushing wound. I knew I had no time to waste, but I also knew how quickly a man can bleed out from such a wound. The others surrounded the beast, still holding its hand before those glowing eyes as though it had never seen its own blood before. After I sealed the oozing stump to the best of my ability, I began to approach those firing into the flesh of the beast, but I couldn't get close enough before the shock in those scarlet eyes gave way to a rage-fueled howl. I moved so quickly my eyes could barely even register what happened. With one swift swat of the hand that was still in one piece, it tore its glossy, black and blood-soaked claws into the side of the man on the far left. He screamed out in a sound not unlike that which the sheriff had shrieked, as the hand closed into a fist while it wrapped around his torso. It squeezed and twisted, echoing snapping, crunching sounds across the forest. In one final flick of the muscled wrist, the man was shredded into two pieces, both parts gushing fluids and entrails across the one who stood to his right. As it dug its large, crimson-stained and sharpened teeth into the throat of the next poor bastard in line, I knew I had to get Garfield away from here if I was able. Clearly, there was nothing I could do to save those who had surrounded the thing. I could still make out where at least one of them had sprinted through the trees, hopeful to escape the gruesome fates of his friends. I gave one last look to the man who had about a foot-long ditch chewed from his neck down to his chest, with broken shards of rib bones piercing through the ground beef-lined chest cavity, before I threw the chief across my shoulder and ran as fast as my legs could carry us. As I attempted to charge back towards the riverbank I had pulled myself from not too long ago, I heard one last gargled scream from off in the distance behind me, before everything but my own charging footsteps fell silent. Garfield didn't even seem to be moving as I charged on, but I hoped he'd only passed out, and not that I hadn't slowed his blood flow enough. I still only had so much time to get him some professional help, but I was prepared to keep speeding towards civilization for as long as I could. "Chief?" A voice spoke through the walkie the sheriff had clipped to his belt. "Chief, you there?" "He's hurt," I replied, trying to get him some help. "Wait, where'd you guys go? A couple of us got turned around and we heard shots fired. You killed that fucker Bauer?" "Bauer ain't the killer. There's some kind of beast. Get the hell out of here." I chose to reveal neither who I was nor the fact that that fucker Bauer didn't have shit to do with any of this. Yes, I knew these guys were potentially screwed, but I didn't have time to go hunting for them if I hoped to get Garfield to safety. Still wasn't entirely sure why I was so driven to help a man who had always treated me with nothing but contempt, but I think I sort of needed to. Not only did I need my name cleared on this, but that son of a bitch owed me now. Well, if I could save his ass, he would. As soon as I reached the lake, I stopped for a moment, laid the chief down, and inspected both the shredded tissue and his pulse. I had to tighten the tourniquet down some more, and he was looking incredibly pale, but his pulse was surprisingly strong, even with the blood loss and trauma. I decided to take a moment to catch my breath before quenching my thirst in the refreshing river water. Everything was quiet aside from my own thumping heartbeat and the shallow breath of the chief. I knew I had to get moving, but my side was still splitting from the hasty retreat. I still felt like shit for not being able to save the other guys, as well as leaving God knows how many others behind, but I had to focus on the life I could save, even if it was that of a relentless prick who had always had it out for me. I let my guard down. I should have known that was a mistake. I got sloppy, and it was my own fault that I didn't see it coming. I didn't even realize it had stalked up from behind me while I sat there, resting my legs and back. With its massive proportions, I think I allowed myself to believe it was not the most stealthy of creatures. I know better than this. I know you never make assumptions about a burgeoning threat. Maybe my pig-headed ass deserved to die along with every other lost soul on that mountain. It let out a deep growl that almost caused the ground to shudder. I looked out to the water to see the moonlight's glow highlighting the reflection of the thing as it stood over me. His chest was heaving with angered breath as it stared down at me with those piercing eyes. I stayed still. I didn't twitch. I wanted to let it assume I was paralyzed with fear. I dropped my guard. Got comfortable and self-assured. I could tell that this thing was intelligent, to a point at least. But maybe it could be arrogant too. I edged my hand slowly to the hilt of my blade sheathed to my belt. I could only hope it didn't notice. I almost wished I hadn't dropped the chief's pistol down beside where he lay as I tightened the belt around his stump, but I hoped my blade would be enough. I turned my head and body to glare up into its eyes. I began to tremble and whimper. Give it what it wants. Let it see my fear. Make it think I'm broken. It just tilted its head from one side, still keeping its snarling constant, allowing the thick drool to seep from its upturned lips, dripping to the ground beside me. I just kept on whining and sobbing, uttering pleas to spare my worthless life, while covering my face with one hand, and the other steadily creeping towards my knife. As I felt my fingers wrap around the hardened hilt of my K-bar, the beast threw back its head, wailing a victorious howl into the night and across the darkened trees. That's right, you son of a bitch. You got me pegged. You got me beat. Ain't nothing to it now, right? You stupid sack of shit-laced fur. You got cocky. As soon as its upturned mouth called out, I whipped my knife out before pushing myself forward between its legs. I don't know if this thing's anatomy works with the same rules as ours do, but I know what a split Achilles tendon does to a person. As soon as I got behind it, I swiped my knife across the tendon at the back of the elongated ankle. It instantly echoed an ear-piercing squeal, dropping it to its knees on the side I cut. I tried to leap for the other leg, but it caught me by the arm before I made it. Damn, this thing was fast. As I felt the grip tighten around the arm which held the K-bar, I glanced over to the stump hanging from Garfield's shoulder, knowing full well this could be my fate if I didn't act fast. I dropped the knife, instantly catching it with my other arm. Before the massive fingers could shatter my bones and twist my arm free of my body, I stuck my blade through its forearm, weaving it from side to side within the now gushing meat. It shrieked again, releasing its grip on my arm, but it swatted me to the side before I could pull my knife back out. I felt my body soar through the air before I landed some 20 feet or so from where the beast stood, pulling my K-bar from its arm and throwing it to the side. It faced me now with those red eyes cutting into mine again, crouching down as though it was set to pounce. I was weaponless now. I could vaguely make out my blade reflecting the moonlight far out of my reach, but there's no way I could get to it before the monster could get to me. It was a classic face-off as we gazed upon one another. I prepared to hold my ground, but I knew I had no chance in a hand-to-hand fight, not with something like this. As it spread open the fingers on both of its enormous hands, I noticed the one I had split down the center had already sealed itself back shut. Could this thing really heal so quickly? Even with that factor, when it prepared to leap towards me, it buckled from the severed tendon, falling back to one side, giving me a small window to attempt to reach my knife. I sprinted faster than I ever have before, desperate to reach my only manner of defense. As soon as I took off, the beast pushed from the ground with its good leg, ramming its sizable shoulder against me as I attempted to pass by. I hit the ground hard, knocking the wind from my lungs. I scrambled to get back to my feet, but it jumped me again, pinning me to the forest floor before I could get myself clear. It raised back up, holding its still oozing palm on my chest. It still had a steady blood flow, even if it had sealed back together on the inside. I dug my fingers into the gnarled ditch, attempting to force it to release the pressure on my chest, but it just raised the hand back up before thrusting a bit down on me again. I coughed and gagged from the breaking of at least one rib, and even more so when it dug its claws through the flesh of my gut and shoulders. It just glared down at me again. I knew it had me now. I couldn't go anywhere. I just closed my eyes and prepared for my inevitable shredding tissue. Somewhere beyond the darkness of my eyelids, a gunshot, followed by another shocked whine, broke me free from my self-pitying moment. I opened my eyes just in time to see another gunshot cause the side of the creature's face to tear open, gaping the wide mouth more than it was previously capable of. I looked over to see Garfield with his gun outstretched in his lone hand, firing one shot after another. As soon as the grip on my chest released, I fought to break free from the ground to get back on my quest to regain possession of my knife. The pain was intense from the flesh of my stomach and shoulders, as well as the bones that were very likely broken beneath the surface, but I pushed through it. The very second I wrapped my fingers around the hilt, I charged towards the beast as it attempted to reach the chief, between the gunshots tearing into its face. It swatted the gun from his hand, causing another cracking sound, followed by a scream from Garfield. I knew his only remaining arm had likely shattered, but I wouldn't give the monster a chance to remove it as it had the other. As soon as I closed the gap between us, I leapt onto its shoulders as it leaned down over the sheriff. I dug my blade right into its neck, right where it met its muscled shoulder. Once and once again, I buried my blade to the hilt, each one causing another gargled whine to erupt from its gaping maw. It pushed back on its good foot, landing with its back on the ground and me sandwiched between. I tried to gag from the already broken ribs being compressed more, but as soon as the beast gathered its bearings, it rolled off me and quickly limped away from us. I watched on from the ground as the blackened fur blended with the trees, shrinking away into the distance once more. I was hurting like hell, and I could tell the chief was too, but we had survived. I knew it would only be a matter of time before it recovered from the injuries we managed to inflict, so I didn't have any more time to waste. I quickly set Garfield's arm back into place as well as I could, wrapped it up, wedged it between two sturdy sticks, and threw him back over my shoulder. He protested at first, assuring me he was fit to walk, but we both knew he was in no condition to move as quickly as we needed to. Even with my broken rib bones skidding against one another beneath my skin, I wouldn't let up this time. I wasn't exactly sure if I was going in the right direction, but now that the chief was more aware, he was able to take part in the navigation. As we finally saw the streetlights of the city ahead between those last few remaining trees we had to get through, the voice returned on the radio. The sheriff warned them what was out there with them, and even though they sounded freaked out by this news, they assured us that if they couldn't get off the mountain, they'd find a good spot to hide. They talked back and forth with the chief, even when we managed to reach civilization again. Garfield said he would send in more guys to help them get back home, but they wouldn't hear it. With all the lives lost already, they made him swear they wouldn't send anybody else in. It didn't take long to get the attention of some of the city's residents, and being such a close-knit and friendly folk, To those they didn't consider outsiders anyway, they had an ambulance headed our way quickly. I didn't accompany the sheriff into the back of that meat wagon, though. My work was not yet finished, regardless of how much I was hurting. Yeah, I didn't have the ability to just rest for a bit and allow my body to heal as that thing did, but I didn't much care at the time. The chief offered me his gun before he was hauled away, but it was about as useful to me as a well-balanced rock with its ammunition spent. Maybe I'd be able to track down one of the weapons left in the wake of the creature's previous attacks, one that may yet have a few rounds left anyway. I figured I only had a little time before the monster was back up to full strength, so I had no time to worry about gathering up any other supplies I may need. It didn't matter if I didn't make it back off the mountain again. I didn't have much else anymore, aside from a beat-up camper that may never run again. I hated this damn town, and nobody would shed a tear for me even if I did put an end to that thing. But I spent most of my adult life putting myself on the line for folks who didn't give a shit if I was left in pieces when the dust clears. I was a living and breathing weapon. It's the only thing I'd ever been good at, and if there was ever a time to kill, yeah, this was it. That monster drew blood from the people of this shitty slice of the world before it took the time to spill mine too. It was my turn now. I knew we could hurt it. A wise man once said, if it bleeds, we can kill it. That's just what I aim to do. Last time it had the drop on us, but I was the hunter now. I was ready for it now. It wanted a war, and who was I to disappoint? It wasn't long before I came upon the riverbank that almost left me dead for a third time, and there was still a healthy amount of blood pooled there. I figured most of it was what leaked out of the chief, but we put a hurting on the beast too. Of course, I was still aching pretty good myself, but I didn't have the time to worry about all that. Likely I'd be suffering a good deal more by the time the work was done, but yeah, that's just part of the job. Can't always be avoided, really. I took a minute to clean up my wounds by the lake, but they were still oozing quite a bit. I knew I'd have to do something about the bleeding soon, but I had nothing to use to seal myself back shut. The holes in my shoulder were leaking worse than the ones in my gut, but I would have to close them to the best of my ability if I hoped to take on the beast. Couldn't do much if I bled out by the time I hunted the bastard down. It didn't take me long to get back to where that poor bastard had been ripped in two, something that showed even more painfully now that I could really take it in. The look that was frozen onto his face was one I was all too familiar with. I'd seen that look on many faces in my day. Some of them saw the other side of it, but the expression was always the same whether they lived or not. Something like shock combined with the visceral horror of seeing a part of you that ain't there anymore. Could be something they can fix, but not always. Even if they did get it back in the end, it doesn't change that terror of losing it in the first place. I found the gun the man who was quite literally beside himself had been wielding before he met his end. There were still a few rounds left, but I would have to sacrifice at least one of them. It wasn't easy to split the bullet to access the gunpowder within. I ended up using 2 rocks as a makeshift set of pliers. I was a bit nervous I would set the damn thing off. Once I got to the powder, I packed it into each of the holes gouged into my meat. Fortunately, the guy who was kind enough to leave me his gun was also a smoker. I had to light each one of those holes individually, and I damn near passed out by the third. Took everything I had to finish the job, and by the time it was done, I was breathing heavier than I was by the time I got the chief back to town. I had to bite down on a stick to keep myself from screaming, but I couldn't risk letting that monster knowing I was coming for it. After a few minutes, I checked to make sure the blood had really stopped flowing and got back on the hunt. As I continued my hike, I saw more parts of folks hanging from trees or discarded on the ground. Blood lined the ground in places, and gore hung from branches here and there. Can't deny I felt my stomach fight against it a few times, even if the sight of such things were nothing new to me. I suppose you don't ever get used to something like that. I've had those times where I wasn't entirely sure if I was quite human anymore. That was back before I was hunting something completely inhuman. Having spent so many hours under the moonlight, my eyes had grown accustomed to the darkness for long enough that I didn't have much trouble maintaining far more stealth than I had before. Even with all the carnage and chaos surrounding me, I managed to get a read on tracking the beast. The footprints weren't hard to differentiate from any other feet that had walked across the mountain, and it had left clumps of that dark matted fur to the trees and branches here and there. I suppose something of that size is bound to leave a good deal of trace around, but I knew it was smarter than I originally thought too. I was remaining on the defensive after I left that last pile of its victims behind. making sure not to let my guard down for even a second. It was only maybe 20 minutes later when I heard something that told me I was definitely on the right track. The scream sounded as though they were coming from just a ways ahead, and the growling that accompanied them damn near turned my hair white. I picked up my pace, hoping to make it to where the men were still yelling out before it was too late. I still kept my footfalls as silent as I could as I sped up the stoop, hearing the screams turn to more gargled coughs. I knew there would be nothing I could do for the one who hung limp, impaled on the claws of those massive hands running across through the trees. I ducked down, trying to keep out of sight while cutting my eyes across the scene in search of any other survivors. I saw no sign of anybody else, but the monster didn't seem to be in any rush to get moving. It could be that it had already wiped out everyone else, but perhaps they had managed to escape while their buddy took one for the team. Whichever way it had gone, that wasn't my immediate concern. After the beast tossed its victim to one side like an old shoe, it actually looked to be somewhat tuckered out. It was panting heavily while its muzzled shoulders appeared as though they drooped almost lifelessly. As it slowly glanced in either direction before beginning to almost casually stroll away, it did not appear to be in any sort of hurry. If I was lucky, something that had felt incredibly elusive since the beginning of this batshit crazy night, it wouldn't notice me as I stalked behind. Even moving slowly, it was tricky to keep up, as those long legs took far wider strides than I was capable of. Though I did lose sight of it from time to time, I could at least hear what direction those heavy steps were coming from. I was so focused on keeping up, I damn near lost my footing on a wide ditch. It looked about 10 feet wide and just as many deep, but I caught myself before I caused enough of a ruckus to catch the attention of my quarry. I worried I'd lost it by the time I worked my way around the hole, but I made damn sure I carved into the tree closest to the edge. I had to be sure I recognized where that drop-off was the next time I came back this way. When the trees parted to give way to a fairly wide opening, I feared I would be unable to keep myself hidden as I followed from behind, but when I noticed where it was headed, I remained concealed behind the tree line. It looked to be an abandoned mine or something of the like. The wide entrance was surrounded by overgrown vines and bushes, but the beast didn't so much as look back before it crossed through the aged and cracked doorway. I stayed parked behind that thick bark until I was secure that the beast was not coming back out. Near as I could figure, this had to be its nest or lair, or whatever the fuck you call the home of a thing like that. It doesn't matter how big or evil something is, everything needs a good place to rest. God knows I could have used some myself, but I'd been trained to go without sleep for days if I had to. Once I felt sure enough that it wasn't coming back out, that's when I went to work. All I had was a gun, maybe a handful of rounds left, my wits, and my trusty K-bar. But if I played my cards right, I wouldn't need to shoot until it was ready. I stayed as silent as I could while I set some rocks out around the entry to the cavern. Not only would it give me an advantage if it stumbled a bit when it came back out, but I hoped I'd be able to hear it if it re-emerged while I took care of a few things. There were a few old boards splayed across the ground next to the opening, which I presumed were once bolted over the doorway to keep trespassers out. Yeah, those could come in handy soon enough. After I had my speed bump set up, I was headed back into the woods, not too far off, but enough of a distance to hopefully keep it from hearing what I was up to. It took some time to sharpen down enough of those loose and discarded larger branches into spikes, but I wedged several between the trees as well as lining the bottom of that pit I almost fell into a ways back. Even though I felt my broken ribs trying to tear through me from the inside out, I heaved some heavier ones up by some vines, setting up a trigger system for me to kick out of the way when the time came. I made a stack of rudimentary spears to perhaps be able to do some damage from a distance. It wasn't much, but I didn't have a whole lot to work with. It probably took me a good couple of hours to do what I could, but I had one last trap I wanted to set up, one that may prove quite tricky to get in place without disturbing my prey. I moved slowly as I crept up onto the opening of that mine shaft where the beast hopefully slept soundly. I set up the broken pieces of board before sliding one boulder after another up to the ledge. Those first few were the most concerning, as I couldn't know how much strength those ancient planks had, but I grew more confident with each one I managed to stack. I was sure they wouldn't hold in place for long, but once I felt sure there was enough to at least accomplish something, I was ready to wake the creature. I snuck back to the tree line, secured myself in place behind one of the thicker trunks, and trained my newfound rifle on the opening through which the beast crossed some hours before. Knowing neither how far it had gone inside, nor how quickly it may react to my assault, I would have to be able to switch my aim from the opening to the wooden planks above in a split second. I practiced switching the barrel's direction back and forth for a few moments before I was secure enough to make my shot. I didn't know how accurate this weapon was until I fired off that first round, but I could only hope that my reflexes would be quick enough with how exhausted my weakened body felt. My ribs still throbbed, as did the quintet of holes I had sealed shut with fire, but I had no more time to waste. This was it, win or lose. I could only hope I would do enough damage to it before I lost too much blood. As soon as the sounds of that first bullet launching into the open mineshaft echoed across the otherwise silent forest, an angered and ferocious howl erupted from inside. Even from as far away as I perched behind the tree, I felt the ground vibrate from the thundering giant feet. It only took a split second for those glowing red eyes to carve through the darkness before I saw that snarling snout being illuminated by the moon. My second shot instantly split the dry rotted boards, spilling the large and heavy boulders across the upper back of the beast as soon as it sprung from the cave's mouth, stumbling over the large stones I had lined across the doorway. The very moment it uttered that high-pitched squeal from its mouth, I emptied the rest of my weapon's payload into that matted fur. Though the heavy rocks had pressed it momentarily to the hard ground, it wasted no time in pushing back to its feet, howling again as my bullets drilled into its flesh, spurting globs of thick and dark blood against the border of the entryway to its lair. A gargled howl breached its lips as crimson spewed from behind its jagged teeth. I tossed the gun as soon as that last round was spent before speeding back towards my next trap, with the monster charging right behind me, barely having missed a beat from my initial attacks. I could practically feel its foul breath on the back of my neck as I skidded to the ground, planting the heel of my boot into the slim but sturdy makeshift trigger lever. When the twig snapped, twin heavy spikes soared down from either side, each one piercing into the midsection of my pursuer. Oh yeah, those hurt that son of a bitch. I could tell from the anguished shriek that bellowed from its mouth, as well as the blood that gouted from where those oversized stakes impaled into its fur-lined meat. It tried to wrestle itself off the ground where it dropped after it got stuck, but that just buried the spikes deeper. For a minute there, I thought I might actually be able to pull this off. That basic rule of survival that I once more allowed to slip from my mind for a moment too long. Never get cocky. The guns firing from somewhere behind me pulled my attention away from my prey for long enough for me to miss my chance to end it right there and then. The two dumbasses who'd left their buddy for dead a ways back were running right at me with their bullets landing closer to me than what I hoped they were trying to hit. I turned back to face the beast just in time for it to swipe its massive hand right across me. I felt two of the claws tear into my chest, while a third narrowly missed my throat by a half-inch at best. I had his fingers splayed out as it lashed out, so that the thumb was fortunately spread out to one side, but the forefinger caught me across the face. If I hadn't turned my head in time, I would likely taken an eye out, but it split my cheek from my ear to my mouth. And when I screamed out from the shock and pain, I felt that side open far wider than it was previously able to. I hit the ground hard, and while blood gushed onto the grass from my face and chest, I just knew I was done for. I tried to pull myself away before it could jump me, but the bullets whizzing by and above my head made me question every single movement I could even think about. Once more, I could feel the breath of the beast as it growled from so close above where I lay. I just knew I was fucked. If it hadn't been for one of those idiots finally making contact with their shots, I'm positive I would have been torn to shreds in that same spot I was rooted to. After the howling squeal bellowed out right behind my head, I felt the ground compress as the monster pushed itself away from it, smashing into the trees ahead, splitting them apart and raining splinters down around me like a storm. I took the brief opportunity to thrust myself back to my feet, not even taking the time to check on how bad I was messed up. My head spun for a moment as I regained my balance before a duet of horrified squeals echoed out from some yards away. I can't say I was shocked to see both men impaled on the claws of the creature, but it was still not an easy sight to witness. It looked as though it had nailed them both as soon as it got within reach, tearing into their torsos and out the other side. I had to force my trembling legs to move while it slammed one against the tree, splitting the body apart while its hand broke free from the guy's right side. With that massive mitt loosed, it wrapped its finger across the forehead of the other, prying it back before digging its teeth into his throat, pulling back what was left of the head away. I was so drenched in the blood of those it had just put to a gruesome end, I couldn't tell if its own injuries were still oozing, and with my head so loopy at the time, I wasn't entirely sure where I was headed in relation to my next destination. When it turned back to face me, I found myself gazing into those vibrant, glowing, piercing red eyes for what felt like minutes. I was heaving for breath, and it was looking to be struggling itself. Felt like some sort of western gunfight was brewing as we stared at one another, just waiting for the clock to strike. Whether it was reflex, muscle memory, or just plain old giggles and shits, I made the first move, darting to my right as quickly as I could. I could only hope I charged in the right direction as the beast pummeled through the trees to clear a pathway. As soon as I caught sight of my small stack of wooden spears, I knew it was on the right track, but I had to get there first. I had to lead it to where I wanted, not wherever it could finish me off the quickest. Every fiber of every muscle burned, as well as the pulsing of my series of gaping wounds. I was running on pure instinct, pure drive to survive. His bloodlust was strong, as was its hatred for me. I heard it worse than perhaps anybody else had before, and it wouldn't think twice when it got within range. That's exactly what I was counting on. At the time, I hadn't really believed myself to have any kind of concrete plan on how I lined them up. But when I saw the pit ahead, I had a brief visual image of how I had aligned them, of the gap I had left between them. As had been the case more times than I can even count by now, it was right behind me, but I had to allow it to get close for this to work. As soon as I leapt forwards, I heard it loudly grunt as it pushed its own legs free from the ground. I had so little time to adjust my posture, it would be a miracle if this worked. But as I spun myself around to face its engorged and gaping mouth, I pinned my arms to my side, clamping my legs together as I fell backwards. I closed my eyes once again, as this would be over in an instant whether I pulled it off or not. While the cool air whistled through the cavernous split in my face, my back slamming against the ground, knocking the wind right out of me, as did the spike tearing through the outside of my right thigh. But none of that overwhelmed my delight at hearing the quickly muffled squeal. Final sounds that uttered from the twitching mouth of the beast as all 10 spikes buried into its tissue in multiple areas was far more satisfying than I could have imagined. Even with the likely tremendous weight of the thing, I had aligned the spikes in varying angles, so the bulging chest was still propped a foot or so from my face as we both lay broken at the base of the deep ditch in the forest floor. I don't know if it was the shock of everything, my ongoing battle to ignore the high degree of pain I was in, or just that I thought I may well be dead, that left me lying in that same spot until the sun began to arise in the distance. Whatever it was, with the woods being finally lit up around me, I could clearly see that the creature was no longer moving, as it still appeared to be almost hovering above me with the light beaming down around its frozen form. I still jabbed it with my knife a few times just to be sure. Yeah, maybe just for fun, truth be told. When I finally decided to wiggle myself out from the bottom of that pit, it was no easy task. With my newly ripped thigh, I found it hard to put pressure on the leg, but was able to use the body of the beast to lift myself up and around. My chest and ribs burned like a son of a bitch while I pulled myself out the rest of the way, but was finally free of both the creature and what had almost served as our twin grave. I took one final look at the behemoth, actually taking in its enormous proportions, which would have appeared far more intimidating in the daylight if it was still alive. I barely remember descending that mountain, but the elderly couple who were the first to see me clearing the trees showed me the first semblance of courtesy and respect I had ever experienced from this damn city. I blacked out in the ambulance, and by the time I opened my eyes again, apparently 3 weeks had passed by. To my surprise, I wasn't alone in the room when I awakened. Sheriff Garfield was sitting in the corner of the room, wearing an expression I never thought his face was capable of, a look of genuine happiness to see me alive. To my continued surprise, not only did he thank me for saving his life, but he apologized for being an asshole to me for so long. He appeared to be doing pretty well, even with the vacant sleeve of his jacket dangling by his side. He told me about the excursion some government officials had made up into that mountain to reclaim the town's dead, along with a few members of the chief's posse who had actually survived that seemingly endless night. There was also more troubling news they brought back with them. It would seem the pit I had laid the beast to rest in was empty when they arrived on the scene. Whether or not that was the work of the higher-ups themselves, or if the damned monster had found a way to crawl back out of that grave, nobody really knew. But they pledged to the townfolk that they had no reason to fear the beast any longer. Apparently, they traced the entirety of that forest between the land and sky by way of a chopper they flew overhead, finding absolutely no trace of the creature. I stuck around for a few more months while I got my strength back, and the sheriff arranged for a local garage to fix up my uncle's old camper for me. He even set me up in a hotel room while the work was done. Sure enough, over the course of that time, it seemed the mountain had truly become a safe place for folks to camp and fish again. It took some time for many to get that idea. Most still wouldn't set foot in those woods ever again, but I felt pretty safe in the notion that my work here was done. The day I set out to leave town, Garfield shook my hand while telling me I was always welcome should I ever choose to return. He handed me a large envelope containing about 10 grand that the town had pulled together, along with a card signed by so many denizens of the city that once saw me as little more than filth. The scars I earned up on that mountain will always be a part of me, but they're not quite as grotesque as I expected them to be. All in all, the doctors did a solid job on my face, though I have something of a permanent smirk on that side of my mouth now. Even the deep ditches on my chest are not as visible as they were when I first left the hospital. Yeah, I've gathered more than my fair share of scars over the course of my life, but each and every one provides me with a reminder, not of things I wish to remember, but of things I have survived. And that's not for nothing. I don't know where I'm headed from here, but I don't think I'm quite ready to rejoin the world just yet. I can't say whether I'll come back this way or not, but it's nice to know there are people I may have place amongst, should I ever crave such a thing. For the time being, I think I'll find somewhere secluded, somewhere I can heal both my body and mind. I thought I'd seen the worst things that the world had to offer, but I can only imagine what else may be out there lurking in the shadows, just waiting for something to chew on. If I'm lucky, maybe I've seen the last of such things. And that's what I'm hoping for anyway.